101 ESPN.
And a line drive into left center field, down for a base hit. Arenado with a 2-strike hit. And the Cardinals add on, it's 3-0.
Late offense always helps. Offense helps in general. So I'm glad we were able to string together some at-bats today and be able to push some runs across.
We understand what the runway looks like and what's ahead of us, but the only thing we can do is, like I said earlier, is focus on the very next pitch. And that's what we're in control of. And that's what the guys are doing really well, and we'll continue to do that.
That's Ali Marmal. All that audio courtesy of Bally Sports Midwest after the Cardinals shut out the Brewers yesterday and, more importantly, pick up a series win. And alongside Tanner Hendrickson and Bradford Bruns, who's in today, we don't have BK. It's just the three of us. I'm Alex Ferrario as we get into the Cardinals picking up a good series win. I'm not going to come on the airwaves and start this off as Debbie Downer, as people probably expect me to, T-Bone. That's a good win. That's a good series win because going up against the Milwaukee Brewers, I said it. I thought you were going to get shellacked. I didn't know you were going to pick up a victory against the Milwaukee Brewers in this series and push you even further out of this playoff conversation. Now, it did very little damage in terms of your chances of getting the NL Central title because you're still 10 games behind the Milwaukee Brewers. So I'm setting that to the side. But it kept you alive in the wild card race. If anything, it puts you right in the race with two other teams, and you're fighting against the Atlanta Braves because, to me, San Diego, Arizona, out of the conversation. So it's a really good, solid performance against a Milwaukee Brewers team that obviously was struggling. But, T-Bone, I also couldn't help myself watching that game yesterday. I couldn't help myself where I see the Cardinals picking up runs after runs after runs. But more than not, they leave guys stranded at second and third base with one out. The bases loaded multiple times once again and don't score runs. You went 4 for 17 in that game against the Milwaukee Brewers with runners in scoring position. A majority of the runs that you scored against Milwaukee on both the 3-0 victory and the 10-6 victory that you had that went to extra innings against them. I couldn't help but think that this told me more about who the Milwaukee Brewers are than who the Cardinals were. And I know that sounds super negative, and I said I'm not going to, but I just think that's important to point out where the National League is right now. Like the Cardinals, you're in a playoff race. We all know that, and the hope is you can find a way to get in. But like I just watched the top team in the NL Central that we've been talking about chasing down that has been good all season long, basically walk you to 2 victories. So as much as I can celebrate the Cardinals picking up 2 wins out of 3 against the Milwaukee Brewers and keeping their playoff hopes alive, I also think with the Minnesota Twins coming up, that is in the middle of one of the best and most competitive divisions right now in all of baseball, with the San Diego Padres coming up, with the New York Yankees coming up, I do think it's very important to look at this and say, I think that series told you more about who the Milwaukee Brewers are if they get to the postseason than the Cardinals' hopes of getting into the postseason.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was when I was watching that game last night, and I watched Miles Mikolas pitch, to his credit, really well. 6 innings, 2 hits, 1 walk, 3 strikeouts. That's the Miles Mikolas you were hoping you were going to get when the season started. But I'm just at the point now where I'm not buying that the Cardinals are really going to go on a run. And, you know, that was an impressive 2 wins against the Milwaukee Brewers, the best team in your division. But, man, that series to me told me more about Milwaukee because I've been the one on this radio station when we talk about, well, can they catch the Brewers? Well, are the Brewers for real? I keep looking at their roster going, I still don't know how they're doing this because they've started like 18 different guys when they needed to on the mound. You look at their offense has been pretty good. Hoskins has been good. Contreras has been good. Adames has been good. But, like, when I look at their rotation, like, nobody really scares you. Like, Freddie Peralta, he's at a 3.86 ERA. He's a solid guy. He's not a number 1. Am I really going to believe in Colin Ray or Tobias Myers as their starters? No, they're just kind of piecing it together. And then I watched them this weekend, and, man, they just kept handing you opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. They ended up walking 13 batters in the final 2 games of that series.
Damn.
That's just unacceptable if you're the Milwaukee Brewers. Like, they tried to give you those wins, and we talked about it after the walk-off win on days blending together, Wednesday. The Cardinals, though they were basically handed that game, almost gave it right back. Yeah. And it's not like yesterday they really put away the Milwaukee Brewers, you know? Mm-hmm. They win that game 3-0. They were 2 for 8 with runners in scoring position. They left 12 runners on base. Like,
bases loaded again, multiple innings.
Yeah, like, sure, they did their job. They won. Not trying to take anything away from them. But I didn't leave that series going, wow, the Cardinals looked really impressive. I left that series going, whoa, Milwaukee does not look like a team that's going to do much of a run when we get to October.
And certainly not a team, guys, that looked like one that had just reeled off 6 consecutive victories entering this series. As you said, Tanner, given the smoke and mirrors nature, the look of that rotation, it really is remarkable that here we sit getting later into August and the Brewers are still able to do that from a pitching standpoint. But here's why I'm not getting overly enamored with yesterday's victory. It's set up in so many different ways, so many different forms, like your classic tight, ultra tight Cardinals victory from April, May. And why is that? Because you produced very little in the way of offense, of substance, but you once again received a nice performance from Miles Michaelis, a couple in a row, and then you handed it off in the bullpen to whom? It's Kittredge again, Romero, Helsley. It looked like all sorts of shades of early April and May, but in isolation, when once again viewed in isolation, everything had to come together perfectly with virtually no margin for error again for the Cardinals to take this game. That's why I'm not buying in long term.
Our Air Comfort Service text line 314-399-9646. Also our Graveyard chat up on our YouTube channel at 101 ESPN STL. The 314 texted it. Honestly, that one frustrated me more, seeing the state of the NL Central and how the Cardinals could capitalize on that, but not throughout the regular season. And that's honestly kind of what it ended with for me, was like, man, I've seen this team lose against the Cubs, who aren't that good. I've seen this team lose against the Reds, who, again, aren't that good. And you just witnessed the Milwaukee Brewers walk the world in 2 out of 3 that were easier wins for you. And that's where the frustration really lies, is the Cardinals have the mindset going into every season of like, oh, well, we just got to get in, that we could be the best in the NL Central, and that's all it takes. Yeah, you should be the best in the NL Central, because I just witnessed how Milwaukee is flaky. And the fact that you still sit at a minus 56 run differential, you still sit 1 game below 500, and you still are 3-7 in your last 10. When I watch all of these other teams around the NL Central scuffle, not just now, but back in May, June, July, that's the part that I think gets you more frustrated. Not just the win, but the fact that you won that series. That should have been one of those, that shouldn't be the jumping off point for Cardinals fans to say, oh, this is the moment you circle and watch them go on a run. That should be the moment where you solidify the fact that you are the best in the NL Central and you should clean up the rest of the competition.
Yeah, and it's kind of telling. We've talked about this. Like, you look at the National League as a whole, the National League is down, you know? Not just talking about the Milwaukee Brewers, but what does that say about the St. Louis Cardinals that they can't even figure things out in this version of the National League, let alone the NL Central, which I think kind of has ended up being what we expected. Like, we thought the Cardinals were going to be what the Brewers are, you know, the team that kind of ran away potentially with the division. Yeah. You didn't know what the Reds would be. You didn't know what the Cubs would be. The Pirates had some exciting talent. You just thought, okay, maybe everybody else kind of sticks around that 500 mark. Well, Milwaukee separated themselves, and if I'm being honest, they feel like a paper tiger. And you're right, it is frustrating because this should be kind of that part of the season where you're like, okay, now you kind of separate. You're kind of coasting towards potentially an NL Central crown. Not this year. And look, I know some people are going to keep their confidence up, and you know what? You're probably going to live longer than me. And good for you. But I look at that series, and I can't look at it and say, that's the jumping off point for the Cardinals, because it did feel a lot like what we've seen from the Cardinals. To Bradford's point, like, it ended up being like the perfect formula for them yesterday. They're finding a way to scratch and claw 3 runs out, and then they can hand it over to their bullpen. They still don't have enough pitching, in my opinion. Their offense is still too inconsistent. This doesn't feel like a jumping off point. That felt more of like, oh, Milwaukee just laid a total egg in St. Louis.
Yeah, Tanner, we've outlined the pitching, obviously, but Milwaukee certainly, I think, has its fair share of concerns on the offensive end as well. When you're basically relying on Contreras, and to be frank, Jackson Chourio, who's been terrific in stretches over the past few weeks, as the meat, as the real linchpins of your order, you're going to have some serious concerns if and when you qualify for postseason play. So I think that term that you utilize, paper tiger, would be appropriate once again to discuss and dissect a Milwaukee squad that has gone into October in each of the past few seasons. And once again, you see the team on paper, you see the manifestations, the results there. It looks exactly the same, but give them credit so far this season for having that run differential plus 100 and absolutely running away from the rest of the pack here.
So can I play a cut from postgame yesterday that Got me a little frustrated, T-Bone?
Sure.
All right. Here's Miles Michaelis after, and by the way, great performance by him yesterday, but this was him post-game after the Cardinals' 3-0 victory.
But, you've got a veteran group of guys, and I think, I don't think we do it on purpose, but I don't think we burn ourselves out early in the year necessarily. Sometimes it takes a while for teams with new players. We have some new additions every year, and we've got some big ones this year. Sometimes it takes a while for those guys to get going and get their feet wet and be comfortable. And for whatever reason, we've been a second-half team, so hopefully we keep turning it on and make a good run here the last month.
I hate that narrative. Well, we just got to turn it on because we're a second-half team. Look at what we've done in the past. That'll get us into the playoffs, and then who knows what happens there. That is a losing mindset to sit there and say, well, we're a second-half team, and we will turn it on in the months of August and September and get into the playoffs. Because you know what that means next season for a group of players on that same team? Who cares if we stink in March, April, June, July? We just got to be right there. And then come August, we'll take off. Also, who's he talking about? Sometimes we got to get some of these guys' feet wet. They're young. They got to get some experience under them. Miles, I hate to break it to you, man, but those guys are in the minor leagues. Mason Wynn has been your best player from start to finish. Alec Burleson, also young and fresh, has been for you great this season. You know who started to turn it on for you right now? Nolan Arenado, who might be dealing with an injury or has dealt with an injury. But that's not a dude who's got his feet wet as a younger player. Your younger players have been the reason you're in this position. So I despise that mindset because every single season it turns into when the Cardinals are 10 games out of a playoff spot. Oh, well, don't be so negative, Alex. The Cardinals are a second-half team, and come August, they'll go on a run. I'd rather this team go on a run in April, May, June, so that they're in a position where if they struggle in the months of August and September, they're still in the conversation, not what we're doing this season.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's time to put to rest the second half notion for the St. Louis Cardinals because this is going to be, I believe, now, if they end up going on a run, we can have a conversation, but we'll see. I am expecting them to drop 2 of 3 in Minnesota this weekend. It's time to put an end to this whole second half. Oh, we're a second half team. We're a second half team. Well, the second half team didn't show up last year. Now, granted, that team was going to be gutted from the get-go in 2023. This year, for all the talk about being a second half team, let's not forget that the St. Louis Cardinals were in a playoff spot going into the trade deadline. That's why we said, hey, they should be buyers. This is why they went out and got Eric Fetty. This is why they went out and they acquired Sean Armstrong. They acquired Tommy Pham for the outfield. They're trying to plug those holes to make that playoff run. Well, for being a team that is quote-unquote a typical second-half team, they are 13-18 in the second half so far this year, on top of a team that never really found its footing and turned things around last year. The idea of the Cardinals organization as being a second-half team, I think that was kind of fair to say kind of in 2021. Well, it was fair in 2021. You could say that in 2022 because you had a lot of the same pieces returning from that squad. It can no longer be said. They are not a second-half team, and that kind of notion just needs to be put to bed.
No, and speaking of individuals, Alex, I mentioned this to you before the start of the show in the office. How can you take these comments and really scrutinize them or look at them on the surface and say they don't run counterintuitive to what we're seeing from a number of the performers, especially on the pitching end? Second half of the season kicks in for good reason. The bullpen performance collectively, it has dropped off. We understand why, because early on your starters still at that point in the season either weren't allowed to or simply weren't going deep enough into games. But in the second half, Kyle Gibson post All-Star break, we have seen the track record in his career of the diminishing returns as the season has gone on. This is great. So Miles Michaelis, he's taken the baton of late. He stepped up and filled some of that void or made up for the lack of performance by a Kyle Gibson, but they just don't add up in terms of the comps, in terms of Tanner, what you said, the overall record there. It's just a narrative that has been fabricated and that doesn't hold any weight right now.
From the 636, would you guys do everyone a favor and just throw yourselves in a pit? Seriously, the team shows signs of life. They could have been swept by the Brewers, and all three of you were crying like babies. Air Comfort Service text line's in a good mood.
Signs of life.
And that's the thing. It's like, this is why I don't like the second half run.
Yes.
Because then it's the old, well, you guys are super negative. The team just won 2 of 3 against the Milwaukee Brewers. What happens if they drop 2 of 3 against Minnesota? Then all of that excitement and anticipation was killed off. I think that's more along the lines of I don't like the second half conversation. But if you are the ultimate optimist, you look at a team in the American League like the Houston Astros and see them turn around in the first half and say, why couldn't the Cardinals do that? T-Bone Bradford and I will decipher that next year on BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
It's time for a DraftKings at Casino Queen Redbird report on 101 ESPN.
Cards take 2 against Brew Crew. I'm Bradford Bruns with your Redbird report. Yesterday's rubber match downtown went the way of host St. Louis. Cardinals blank Milwaukee 3-0 as Victor Scott II collects his first career 3-hit game. The rookie outfielder also scored after a bases-loaded walk to Wilson Contreras, which snapped a scoreless tie in inning number 7. Alec Burleson and Mason Wynn each added 2 hits apiece. Mound-wise, starter Miles Michaelis fired 6 scoreless frames, fanning 3. Ryan Helsley later earned that MLB-leading 39th save. This evening, STL hits Minnesota. Righty Andre Palante goes for Ali Marmol's club, while Twins youngster David Festa hurls first pitch at 7:10.
The Redbird Report is presented by DraftKings at Casino Queen. Play, stay, dine at DraftKings at Casino Queen.
Attention sports fans. Heading downtown to a professional baseball, hockey, or soccer game? Get 10% off your hotel stay at DraftKings at Casino Queen. Just present your game tickets at check-in or use promo code TICKETS24 when booking online. And there's more. Enjoy free shuttle service to and from all baseball and hockey games. No hassle, just fun. For more info or to book your stay, visit DraftKings at CasinoQueen.com. That's DraftKings at CasinoQueen.com. Must be 21. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Based on availability. Restrictions apply.
They are St. Louis. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
We also had another text on our Air Comfort Service text line, T-Bone, at the end of the previous segment that said, you guys, if this was the Blues, you'd be talking about how they're going to go on a run to win the Stanley Cup.
Ferrario would be.
Well, stay tuned. Next segment, I'm going to tell you why the Blues are a Stanley Cup contender this year here on 101 ESPN. With Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, Bradford. Train of thought here. Bradford Bruns.
Grant's having a good time. He's having a good time.
I call Grant Bradford. I call Bradford Grant. It's just what happens.
I've never heard you call Grant Bradford.
Oh, well.
Look at you.
Why do you have to call me out like that right now, man? That's unnecessary.
Just like I'm holding the Cardinals accountable for their actions this year, I'm going to hold you accountable.
Bradford knows the respect and love that I have for that individual right now.
Alex, I'm happy to be here, man. Hey.
With Bradford Bruns and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Alex Ferrario. So we talked about the Cardinals and the Milwaukee Brewers series that just took place, taking on the Minnesota Twins starting tonight. And you looked at the Cardinals this year and you said, why could they never turn it around? Why could they never go on a run? And there's a lot of examples this season of teams that started off a little slow and figured things out and got it going, like the Arizona Diamondbacks are another one of those teams. Those are a little bit more explainable because of the injuries that took place in the early portion of their season. But T-Bone brought up the Houston Astros. And for some reason, I just didn't think about Houston's struggles at the beginning of the season. They were 14-24 on May 11th or May 10th this season. At that point, we were talking about 10 games under 500. I mean, we were legitimately talking about this team potentially trading some of their stars away. Before the Cardinals took 2 of 3 against the Houston Astros this season in June, T-Bone, they were 26-34. Still 8 games under 500, the Houston Astros were, and then the Cardinals went and took 2 of 3, and you're thinking Houston's done. Well, now you look at the Houston Astros, and they are sitting in the division lead for the AL West. They're sitting 9 games above 500 and sitting as one of the better teams in the American League. And if you look at where the Cardinals are at compared to the Houston Astros, you say, how do they not figure out a way to turn this thing around? For me, it's simple. I look at their offense. At the beginning of the season for the Houston Astros as a team, they were not a dangerous team offensively. Like in terms of just OPS, just generic OPS offensively for the Houston Astros, you were sitting a little below 700. And then in the post-All-Star break, you're talking about a team that's towards the top half in Major League Baseball. And that's where the Cardinals fell flat, in my opinion. You survived and brought yourself back from the dead for about a month stretch because your pitching became elite. Houston was dealing with some struggles on pitching, but their offense just was non-existent. Bregman, Altuve, Tucker, who was playing before he was injured, Alvarez, you just didn't have offense. And then they figured out whatever their issues were, and their offense has been one of the best post-All-Star break. The Cardinals relied on the pitching to be elite because their offense could never get going, and then their offense still never got going. And the problem was you exhausted your options with that pitching in the middle of the season. That's why, for me, it always comes back to the Cardinals need to figure out this offensive problem. I understand pitching is a desire, pitching is a need, especially when it comes to a postseason run. But, man, if you don't have an offense that can pull yourself out of the grave, so to speak, I don't know if you're ever going to be able to go on that sustained run that you're talking about.
See, the offense for the Astros certainly helps because you look at what they've got. You know, they've got Yordan Alvarez, who's been unbelievable. 940 OPS this season. That dude's just unbelievable. Yeah. Then they've had a couple of nice pieces, like Bregman's been good. Altuve's been good this year. Diaz, their catcher's been solid. Jeremy Pena has basically been their version of Mason Wynn. The reason to me as to why the Astros could turn it around, and they had the exact same record as last year's Cardinals. 12-24 is how they started. That's what the Cardinals were last year. This year's Cardinals team didn't start off that bad, but we know what it was early on before Mother's Day. They got to 9 games below 500. They looked lost, didn't look like we were ready to write them off. They went on a little bit of a run. Since then, they've kind of relapsed into the team that they were back in the first half there early on. For me, it's the pitching. And to your point on the offense, yes, the Cardinals' offense does need to be better. Like, their offense does need to get closer to what the Astros would look like to where it is. You've got, like, one guy that performs like a superstar, and then you've got a bunch of just really good, like, 20% above league average players around them. Their offense kind of reminds me a little bit of what, like, last year's team looked like prior to the trade deadline for the St. Louis Cardinals, where you looked at it, you said, okay, you got the 1-2 punch of Goldie Arenado, and then you got a bunch of pieces around it that kind of are complementary. Gorman, Donovan, who was playing well, Newpar, who got hot in the second half. Looks a lot like that. But the reason for me that you're able to turn it around, if you look at the Houston Astros and why the Cardinals can't, the Astros just have pitching, man. I mean, you look at their rotation. Blanco, 3.14 ERA. Valdez, 3.2 ERA. Hunter Brown, 3.82 ERA. Spencer Arguetti, who just made the start the other day, and what brought my attention to this, he was asked a question, and he said, the Houston Astros are back. And you look at it, and you're right, they're in first place. Arguetti, since the All-Star break, has been pitching. Guess what? Sub-4 ERA, even sub-3.5. He's at a 3.44 ERA. It just comes down to pitch. Oh, and by the way, they're adding this guy named Justin Verlander back to the rotation, who's pretty good as well. So, For me, it comes down to pitching, because what is it going to keep you afloat if your offense does go through struggles? And even every offense, I know it feels in St. Louis we talk about this and it becomes kind of a hot button topic. Every offense goes through like a 3-week stretch where it's just not hitting. It happens every single season for every team across Major League Baseball. But what helps you kind of survive that 3-week stretch if your team's going to struggle? What's going to be the thing that can help you win some of those close games? It's just great starting pitching. And that's the thing that I look at with the Houston Astros. And I go back to when we had Brad Ausmus on, the former Houston Astros catcher, now the New York Yankees bench coach. We had him on last year during that stretch where the Cardinals were in that 12-24 stretch. And we asked him, because he was a part of an Astros team in the early 2000s that turned it around. And he said, well, how did we do it? We had good starting pitching. The thing the Cardinals were lacking last year, the thing that the Cardinals are still lacking this year. Now, granted, on top of it, they are lacking a good offense this year, unlike last year's squad. But to me, it's the pitching. Pitching is always going to trump a good offense at any time across Major League Baseball. Just look at it. It's happened throughout time here in Major League Baseball history.
Look at the NL playoff rotations right now. And, I mean, that's the part that, I mean, T-Bone's right. Like, I mean, just looking at what they stand right now, you've got Tyler Glasnow with Yamamoto, Jack Flaherty, Clayton Kershaw. Philly's got Wheeler, Nola, Suarez, Sanchez. Arizona's got Gallen, Pfaadt, Rodriguez, and Merrill Kelly. So, I mean, like those top four that you're talking about with those teams, Atlanta is literally living off of Max Fried. Or not Max, yeah, Max Fried and Chris Sale.
And Ronaldo Lopez, who's back in the rotation.
Yes, Ronaldo Lopez. And then the Brewers, I mean, we just saw the Brewers rotation. Their best guys hit probably a bad series for them, but they're still finding ways to stay consistent. So that begs the question, moving forward, because that's what the Cardinals are going to be trying to figure out this offseason, whether you get into the playoffs and you get swept in the wild card or you miss the playoffs. They're going to be asking the question, how do we get back to competing in this? Do we go for elite pitching or do we go for elite offense? And to T-Bone's point, like you look at pitching and say, it's probably the way you're going to do this if you're going to match what these contenders are doing. But if you're the Cardinals, you might have to zig while the other teams zag, because I don't know if you could do anything to match the eliteness of these playoff rotations. The problem is you can't fix your offense to go up against this type of pitching in one offseason, because a lot of the guys you're relying on still haven't even figured it out at the major league level. So you really are stuck between a rock and a hard place right now if you're the Cardinals.
I think Tanner just used the operative word, though, starting pitching. Because if you really examine this Houston bullpen as well, to further that comparison too, and you think about the way in which it is constructed versus that of the Cardinals, 9 times out of 10, I'm not sure that you're actually taking the arms that Houston possesses near the back end over those possessed by the Redbirds. If you think about the starting rotation, and you reeled off all the numbers there, Arrighetti, for crying out loud, he just went out and outdueled Corbin Burns. Yeah. That's what you need at this juncture in the season. And yet, because you were able to you continue to get more innings logged deeper into games from these guys, even from a 24-year-old Arrighetti, for instance. And you're bringing back Justin Verlander now as the chip down the stretch. In his first season there as a setup man, Ryan Presley hasn't exactly been great. Okay, no great shakes. Abreu gives you a nice high average arm there as well. But by and large, this Cardinals bullpen compares very favorably with that of a Houston, but where's the primary difference? It's in the stuff, it's in the swing and miss, it's in the premium performances up front starting-wise.
Yeah, I think, and I'm not trying to deny, like, the offense does need to be better. I'm not trying to tell you, like...
And it's hard to pick one side or the other and say, this is how you do it.
If we're just being honest, this team needs a total
you need both.
Shift in both their offense and in their pitching staff. Right. But I've seen good offenses go into October and get shut down. Like, look at the Philadelphia Phillies offense last year. They lost in the NLCS, if I remember correctly. I'm drawing a blank on who they lost to.
Who was that?
The Philadelphia Phillies.
Oh.
I can't remember who they lost to now. I'm drawing a blank.
For last year, it was...
we saw them lose in the NLCS, if I remember correctly. But their offense got shut down in that series. And it comes down to starting pitching.
Lost to.
Thank you. I was like, why can't I remember who was in the World Series?
Because for a minute there, I'm like, they didn't lose in the NLCS, but they did because the Diamondbacks World Series.
And the Phillies have a good offense, right? We all agree with that. You got Schwarber, you've got Harper, you've got Trey Turner, you've got Nick Castellanos. Yeah, the Diamondbacks pitching shut that down. Mm-hmm. And I know, like, we talked about it at the All-Star break when the All-Star game was on, and some people were like, well, it's an All-Star game, it's an exhibition, you can't really read too much into it. Look, you saw the best hitters in the world at the All-Star game. They got mowed down by all the best pitchers in the world.
Yeah.
Starting pitching, if there's one spot where if you said to me, okay, Cardinals can go in one direction here and become elite at this, whether it be pitching or would you say their offense? I would say I want to be elite in starting pitching.
Yep.
Because you reeled off some of the names that can potentially be in the rotations for these playoff teams. And look, some of those guys are still injured. Some of them are still coming back. But it sounds like the Dodgers believe Glasnow and Yamamoto will be back. Those guys can shut down a good offense.
Yeah.
And then you give yourself a fighting chance. The playoffs become a race to 3, essentially. So that's why, though, yes, the offense does have to improve, you need to also have elite starting pitching to give yourself a fighting chance, and especially in the National League, because it's not like a lot of those rotations are going away. Arizona's got that rotation locked in place.
Philly does too. Ohtani's going to be in it next year.
The Dodgers, oh my God, I totally forgot about Ohtani.
It's going to be Ohtani,
I was thinking they're going to
Yamamoto.
re-sign Jack Flaherty, but they might do that and have Ohtani back.
They might have an elite 5 that roll out there.
Those rotations aren't going away, and you can't build an offense that's going to beat that.
I think either way, you have to understand as a Cardinals fan, it's not going to be a put a Band-Aid over it and fix it in 1 year. This is going to be a longer process, which is why we've talked about the whole sweeping changes for the team and take a step back before you try and take a step forward. With Tanner Hendrickson and Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up in 15 minutes, we've got Ask Us Anything. You send us any question, we will answer it for you. 314-399-9646. You can do that over on our Air Comfort Service text line or up on our YouTube chat, The Graveyard at 101 ESPN STL. But coming up next, the Fast Lane had a really good conversation yesterday about which Blues player has the most to prove this season. T-Bone Bradford and I will give you our thoughts and one area that the power play might try that they haven't tried yet to make it more successful. We'll get to all that next here on 101 ESPN.
Join 101 ESPN for the second annual Blues and Brews on Friday, September 20th at the Anheuser-Busch Brewery. Get fired up for the blues season at this outdoor street party featuring live music from country music star Matt Stell and St. Louis's own Charles Glenn Group, plus appearances by blues players and alumni, food trucks, 101 giveaways, and more. Tickets are on sale now for Blues and Brews presented by Bud Light, 101 ESPN, and 92.3 WIL. Get all the details for Blues and Brews at 101ESPN.com. 101 ESPN Sports Center.
Cardinals feeling Minnesota. Good morning. I'm Bradford Bruns, and this Sports Center update is driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. After taking 2 straight against Milwaukee, St. Louis hits the interleague circuit tonight. First pitch at Target Field set for 7:10 as Andre Pallante opposes Twins righty David Festa. Yesterday, the Redbirds blinked Milwaukee 3-0. Victor Scott, the second, tallied 3 hits in that one. He hasn't struck out either since August 16th. NFL preseason week 3 kicks off with Chicago down in Kansas City 34-21. On campus, number 11 Mizzou draws Murray State very soon. Opening drive guest Mike Kelly understands those big expectations entering 2024.
There's just a great deal of excitement in the air. Now, Missouri fans have got to do the next thing, and that is to sell out Ferrario Field on Thursday night and give Mizzou a 6th consecutive home sellout.
This Sports Center update was driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Giving you the picture, the real big St. Louis sports picture. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
So it seems like an easy question, which Blues player has the most to prove for this upcoming season? And on paper, I think a lot of people will go to the easy ones. Jordan Kyrou, Pavel Buchnevich, Jordan Binnington, maybe Colton Parayko. Doubters are still out there. But it's an interesting topic that the Fast Lane presented yesterday that I thought would be a good conversation piece for us today. Tanner Hendrickson, Bradford Bruns, and Alex Ferrario. So when you think about the Blues with this upcoming season, I do think there's a lot of different players that you can pick, and you can justify that they have the most to prove. And Carey said Jake Neighbors has the most to prove this season, and I agree with that in the sense of if you want a contract and a good one, you back what you did last year up with a 30-goal performance. I mean, Doug Armstrong even basically said, let's not talk about contract extensions until we see some consistency at the NHL level. Marshy said Jordan Kyrou. I think that's going to be a lot of people's answers. Stoltz said Scott Perunovich. Jamie said Pavel Buchnevich. Pavel Buchnevich was the first one that came to mind for me because you get that contract extension. I think there's a lot of people that are going to be talking about it. I've got a different one, though. The guy that I would say has the most to prove this season is Brayden Schenn. And I don't think it's because he hasn't proven it already as an NHL player. I think there are a lot of people that are doubting Brayden Schenn this season because of how bad last year was, because of the injuries, and concerned he's not a top 6 center, let alone a top 6 forward for you next season. And as we've seen in St. Louis, and T-Bone, you know this better than anybody because you've hated Colton Parayko for a long time.
First off, that's blasphemy, but
Tanner.
I am one of those. You mentioned the people that were out on Brayden Schenn. I'm one of those people. I don't think he's a top 6 center anymore. Now I think he's a top 6 forward.
Yeah. St. Louis Blues fans do find a guy that is struggling and that kind of becomes their whipping boy. I don't think that would ever be Brayden Schenn because he plays with the fire that a lot of Blues fans want. But if you can't show the top center or the top 6 center potential or the top 6 wing potential, I think there's going to be a lot of people talking about $6.5 million that needs to get off the books. So to me, there are a lot of guys that have something to prove, but I look at Brayden Schenn and say, man, this is a big season for you because you might become a $6.5 million third-line centerman, or you might still be a steal as a top 6 forward who could put up 60 to 70 points in a season, which, by the way, I believe he can do that.
Yeah, I do like that one because I did consider Brayden Schenn for a little bit for all the reasons that you just said. Because to me, he right now, if you told me like what is the Blues' best lineup, Brayden Schenn would be their 3rd-line center.
I actually agree with you in that one. It comes down to Dvorsky's readiness.
Exactly. And I right now, to me, I think we had this conversation a couple weeks ago or like right around the end of the season. And it was who was the worst contract on the St. Louis Blues. And I nominated Brayden Schenn for that category because he's making $6.5 million for the next 4 seasons, and you already starting to see some levels of decline. Now, granted, some of that could be injuries, but as we know, as you get older, you're more likely to sustain injuries. So I do like that one as him being someone that has the most to prove for the St. Louis Blues. For me, I'm still sticking with the Blues fans' whipping boy, Jordan Kyrou.
Yeah.
Because I think he still continues to be a topic of conversation of, okay, can he be a top-line winger? and he's on the same contract as Robert Thomas. And I think right now when you look at the St. Louis Blues, we talk about kind of the two areas of need for this team. We talk about the number 2 center position. Will it end up becoming Dalibor Dvorsky, whether that is this season or it ends up being a season or two down the line? We talk about that pairing mate with Colton Parayko, that left-sided defenseman. Well, okay, they may have figured that out with Philip Broberg. I think the one that we're not talking enough about is a top-line winger, because right now it's Robert Thomas. I expect it's going to be Jake Neighbors, Robert Thomas, and Jordan Kyrou.
Yeah.
And when I say top-line winger, I think you could see top-line winger production from Jake Neighbors.
Sure.
But when I'm talking about a elite winger, a guy that's going to be on the first line, I'm talking about a guy that can score, not by just parking himself in front of the net. I'm talking about a guy that's got a shot to score, like Vladdy did when he was a top-line winger in the prime of his career.
Yeah, I mean, look around the NHL. How many top-line forwards are viewed as top-line forwards that don't have the shot?
There's like none.
I mean,
like
Zach
maybe
Hyman probably
He's
right
the
now.
only name I thought of to that question.
Even Tom Wilson, who has been that guy.
He's got a decent shot.
Chris Kreider, who is that guy. He's a second-line forward for the New York Rangers.
And that's why, for me, it's Jordan Kyrou as the most approved. Are you that guy? And what I'm saying is I think Kyrou, I don't think he's necessarily playing for his Blues future, because I think he will be here long term.
Let me ask you this, though, Team. I'm sorry to cut you off. Can he do anything, though, to change your mind on that? Because does 40 goals in a season, is that the only way he can make you believe that he's a top-line forward?
I think it's a couple of things. I think it's the goal production is there, whether that be 40, 35 plus, I think would be like the minimum. And look, he finished with 31 goals last year, but his point production has to be there. I mean, he was at 67 compared to 73 a year ago. To me, it's got to be, can you be a guy that is a goal scorer, doesn't go through the major ebbs and flows that we saw from Jordan Kyrou last year? Because he really, there was a lot of skepticism if he was going to get to that 30-plus goal mark last year.
Yeah.
And because it was too inconsistent. So can you cut down on some of those long stretches of not being a producer? Because every goal scorer is going to go through that. We all agree with that. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of, can you kind of shorten those ebbs and flows? The other one for me is, do you look like a player that can play with Robert Thomas? Because what's Robert Thomas going to be getting? He's going to be getting the best of the best matchups.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought Kyrou made strides in his defensive game last year. I really do. I thought he was better. And I'm not just going off of his plus-minus at -12. I thought he did look better defensively.
If I could be honest about it, I don't think I think the best thing for the Blues is Jordan Kyrou is not a top-line winger.
I wonder if that will end up being the case, but my question is then, do you have someone that is a top-line winger? Because Jimmy Snuggerud could end up being kind of Jordan Kyrou-y. Because what I mean by that is he kind of, and look, it was prospects camp. Don't read too much into it.
Yeah.
He had a lot of Kyrou into his game, which was kind of floating around, kind of waiting to make his offensive moves when we were out at prospects camp.
Yeah.
The reason I put the pressure on Jordan Kyrou this season is, can you be that top-line winger? This is his last chance to prove that, by the way.
Yep.
There is no more runway after this season of, are you the guy that will be with Robert Thomas? If not, I'm not saying he's not a St. Louis Blue. I think he falls back into the role of what you're talking about of, okay, he's probably a second-line winger for us. And then the question really becomes, do we have a top-line winger in our system? I
was asked yesterday what my ideal line combinations look like to start the season, and a lot of this is riding on Dalibor Dvorsky being on this team, but my ideal line combinations has Kyrou as a second-line right winger. Because I think Jake Neighbors is that guy that can play against the other team's top potential. Pavel Buchnevich is the guy that has the shot, and you have your net front presence. But if Kyrou can be a 40-goal scorer, that's what this team absolutely needs. So I totally agree that there's a prove-it type of season for Jordan Kyrou. My only hesitancy with putting him in that conversation is I don't know if even if he can't prove it this year, I think the Blues are formulating their roster to the point that they did with Vladimir Tarasenko was, we know who he is. He's got his faults. We need to surround his faults with other guys who can fix that. And I don't think that's a bad thing. That's how the Blues have operated for the last 15 years of a winning by committee rather than one superstar takes the cake. That's how it feels like. It's like, I don't know if there's pressure on him anymore. There's pressure on him to take his game to the next level, but it feels like with the acquisition of Dylan Holloway and all of these prospects, it's, hey, we just need to surround this with guys who can fix his faults throughout the season.
Alex, let me throw one more name at you as well, and I think this dovetails a bit into what we'll discuss later on in the show, but you've had great points in reference to those contributors up front. Let me take it to the back line, specifically accountability on the blue line there. Justin Falk, entering his age 32 season. Given all of the additions the Blues have made, and justly so, on the blue line, so many questions I think still linger entering the season as to how you're going to have those permutations with the power play. Are you going to have the one stable force there? Is Falk going to be your right-handed shot? And is he going to be able to escape further injury this campaign? It's a big year for him. He's still on the books this season for a salary, if I'm not mistaken, around $5 million, but he's not a UFA until 27-28. So in addition to still logging big-time ice time, is he going to be giving you more of that production with the man advantage? I think that the pressure, the onus is definitely on him entering the season too.
It's not a bad one. My only thing with Justin Falk is I don't think there's any competition for him.
Oh, see,
I don't think you have depth on the right side. He'll be in your top 6 no matter what. The competition is top 4 minutes, or does Kessel get those?
I think Falk's playing for his future in St. Louis this year because I had him second on my list. I came up with 3 names last night. Kyrou was number 1 for me. I tried to come up with one. I promise you, I tried to come up with one that I thought was above him. I couldn't come up with one above him.
It's hard.
I had Justin Falk at 2, and I had Shin at 3.
Yeah.
And I had Falk at 2 because, to Bradford's point, right now I'd prefer Kessel in the second pair. And I think they're going to start the season with Justin Falk as your number 2 defenseman on the right side.
And I think it's just because of the youth, because you've got Broberg, who's also young, and you don't want 2 young guys playing top 4 minutes.
I just want the best players paired together.
I'm with you.
I think Falk, it's been a disappointing tenure here in St. Louis, and you know what can potentially happen next offseason? He could potentially get out of the contract because next year his full no trade becomes a modified no trade.
You're right.
So to Bradford's point on Justin Falk having something to prove, I'm with you because I think he's playing. I don't think there's much else for him to prove in St. Louis out in terms of his play on the ice, but I think what he's playing for isn't so much 24-25 based. It's 25-26 based of, are you a guy that we'll be keeping around in the final 2 years of your contract?
Tanner Hendrickson, Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. We will get to your questions next. It's time for Ask Us Anything after the break. 314-399-9646. Ask Us Anything is next here on 101 ESPN.
Text us anytime at 314-399-9646 on the Air Comfort Service Heating, Cooling, and Insulation text line on 101 ESPN.
Since 1961, one name has stood as a beacon of fine dining in St. Louis: Charcoal House. The Charcoal House menu features classic dishes, but it's the steaks, especially the renowned Steak by George, that keep the community coming back for more. Don't forget the top-notch spirits and cocktails, perfect for pairing with your meal. Come experience a timeless and memorable dining experience where every meal is a celebration. Learn more at stlcharcoalhouse.com. Charcoal House, another fabulous locally owned restaurant supported by Kuna Food Service.
back to more of it. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN. You've got questions, we may have the answers. Maybe. It's BK and Ferrario's questions and answers.
Presented by Window World St. Louis.com. Simply the best for less.
314-399-9646. That is our Air Comfort Service text line. You can also send us your Ask Us Anything questions over on our YouTube chat at 101 ESPN STL. We are up with our YouTube cams, brought to you by the Air Alliance team. And, of course, we have the graveyard that you can get in the middle of. With Tanner Hendrickson and Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. Let's start with this one. Guys, what are you expecting Mizzou to clinch a berth in the college football playoff this year? If so, what would that do for the program?
I am expecting them to be in the playoff. I think they are probably going to go 10-2 or 11-1. That's my expectation. Anything outside of that, I think, is a disappointment. I think making the college football playoffs is huge for the program because, one, you're in the college football playoff, which does wonders because you know what that means? It's more national eyes on the Missouri Tigers. You start to become a relevant program from the outside looking in. Yeah, I think it helps you massively in recruiting as well. Eli Drinkwitz can now sell to recruits, not just the NIL side of things, which Missouri does have a pretty good advantage in, but can also sell to them, hey, look, we're not just a one-off. You know, we've been building towards this. We've gotten to the college football playoff. Now you can start to sell guys on, A, they can get there with Missouri, and B, you can also sell them on the idea of you might be the guy that can help us get over the top in the college football playoff.
And, Alex, I go a bit against the grain insofar as I do think that Cotton Bowl victory over OSU, the eyes, the national exposure there, I do think that meant something for this program, and you have to continue to sustain, build, and foster that momentum from last season's 11-win campaign. You have virtually all of your starters returning on offense, with the exception, of course, of a Cody Schrader and Javon Foster at left tackle. But as much ink as Brady Cook and Luther Burden rightfully get for this team in this offense, to me, the offensive line continuity and the experience there is what is going to drive this team later on in the conference schedule. And don't take anything away on paper from the sheer talent that these guys have. However, Tanner, we were talking about it before the show. It is undeniable just how favorable this schedule looks for this team. And you don't want to take anything for granted, but right now, in really scrutinizing that schedule too, I think as far as competition in the SEC, frankly, you're lucky that you're not getting a Texas A&M later in the calendar. You play them early when they're still installing a lot of things under the new head coach, Mike Elko. Alabama isn't quite going to be what Alabama was even last season. And then later on in the season, OU very well could be very tough in year one in the SEC, but that game is at home in November. Everything aligns, health notwithstanding, for this team to go 10-11 once again and get to that CFP.
From the 870, fellas, what rookie do you believe has the best chance to have a Puka-like season? I've got two that I would put in that category. One is Marvin Harrison Jr., all that resides on, both of these reside on your quarterback being great, Kyler Murray. The other one seems like more of a tall task. It's Malik Neighbors with the Giants. You're relying on Daniel Jones, but who else is that guy throwing the ball to? And if you're going fantasy football purposes, which we're going to have our Fantasy Football Friday coming up in the 12 o'clock hour, I think Malik Neighbors is going to be up there solely because the Giants only have one person to throw the ball to.
Yeah, I like that one. I think one for me would be Keon Coleman, the wide receiver taken with the first pick in the second round by the Buffalo Bills. You want to talk about a target share. No Stephon Diggs, kind of open up that wide receiver room. Josh Allen, if they're going to throw the ball to him, there's been a lot of buzz around Coleman at camp. He's the one for me where I could see having a pretty solid year along, and I think Xavier Worthy can move into that role as well. Xavier Worthy looks incredible at Chiefs camp so far this year. I could see where he ends up having that breakout. If you're asking if it's more the Puka Nacua role of who's the guy that was drafted in the 5th round beyond, I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea. I had no idea Puka was gonna do that. I saw reports from Rams camp of Puka Nacua, he's having a great camp, he might be a guy to keep an eye on, and this was my reaction last year at training camp. He's a 5th round pick. No, he's not gonna have a big season. Well, I was wrong.
Just when I thought that I was solely going to have to take on the BK role today, give me Xavier Worthy. There's no doubt about it for me, because I think actually, Tanner, and you mentioned Coleman in Buffalo, who is intriguing in more of that perhaps boom or bust sense. For me, the target distribution that is bound to be there in Kansas City is actually going to work out in Worthy's favor because of the number of vertical threats, intermediate guys underneath too. You have to think that at some point in time too, either Kelsey is going to miss time or simply not be able to ramp it up in the way that we know is going to be there in the postseason. Worthy is going to be heavily featured regardless of what happens with Rice, and the prospects for him, I don't think that they could be brighter, especially early on, knowing that you're not going to have Hollywood Brown early in the season.
Let's do this last one before we hit another break. Guys, I'm surprised that none of you brought up Jordan Binnington as the player who has the most to prove after last season of getting snubbed for the Vezina. I don't think he has anything to prove. I think if people are still doubting Jordan Binnington, you haven't watched enough hockey. Like, the guy has kept you competitive for the last 3 years when you shouldn't have been competitive. Is he the best? Some probably don't think so. Is he a concern in the regular season? I think he proved that wrong last season. To me, Jordan Binnington, his value is if you get to the postseason. And I don't think he has anything to prove in the regular season because this team is so still in the retool mode. I think if this team was if this team was expected to be a Stanley Cup contender, he would have a lot more to prove, but they're not, and that's why I don't think he has anything to prove.
I think he does still have something to prove. I just don't know if it's like really high on the list for me, but I can understand how someone would say his name because, I mean, it's not like I'm not just going to forget the .894 save percentage season in 22-23. And I agree. A lot of that was the defense was poor in front of him. I also think there were a lot of bad goals given up by Jordan Binnington that season. 21-22, he had a .901 save percentage, so he wasn't necessarily great in that year either. If you're looking to see which one was more of the one-off, whether that ends up becoming 22, 23, and 21, 22, or was it last year? I do think he still has something to prove. I just don't know if it's as high on the list as some of the guys that we said in that segment.
Tanner Hendrickson, Bradford Bruns. I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up in 15 minutes, we are going to have our Fantasy Football Friday. So if you've got your fantasy football questions, I know those drafts are either done by now or you've got some coming up. Both of mine are coming up in the next couple of weeks. Send us your fantasy football questions and we'll answer them coming up in 15 minutes. But coming up next, the Minnesota Twins did something an offseason ago that the Cardinals might seriously have to investigate doing. We'll discuss that next on BK and Ferrari on 101 ESPN.
Sign up to play fantasy football with Adam Wainwright, Kyle Gibson, Lars Nootbaar, and others during Big League Impact's 2024 fantasy football season. Help support some awesome charitable causes handpicked by the participating players and show off your fantasy skills with a chance to win a variety of prizes. Space is limited. You can find all the details on how to sign up for Big League Impact's 2024 fantasy football season now at 101ESPN.com. St. Louis gets its sports. WXOS HD1 East St. Louis, 101 ESPN. This is exactly where you want to be listening to us. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
Along with Tanner Hendrickson and Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN as the Cardinals get set to take on the Minnesota Twins tonight. They, along with the Kansas City Royals and the Cleveland Guardians, are in one heck of a battle for the playoff conversation. So that's at least been very intriguing. And the Cardinals are going in to take on a hot team in the Minnesota Twins that has scored 624 runs this season, which in the American League, if I'm not mistaken, T-Bone, third best in terms of runs scored. So the Cardinals are going into that tonight, 7:10 first pitch. But T-Bone brought this conversation up, which I do think is very intriguing for this Cardinals team because we've talked about it. Do the Cardinals have to take the Twins approach from last season, and will it be successful? So for those that don't know, last year, the Twins were coming off of a 87-75 record, and they got to the ALDS. Then the offseason comes in, where ownership kind of forced them into cutting payroll, and they cut $30 million because of the television situation. And in that offseason, the $30 million that they took care of, they let Sonny Gray walk, who is number 2 in the Cy Young conversation, also let Kenta Maeda walk. They traded their number 2 hole hitter in Jorge Polanco for a reliever. You get Anthony DeScalfani out. You bring in 2 prospects. They changed a lot with that team. And they bring in some okay guys. They brought in Carlos Santana for $5 million. They they basically gave the reins to this team, at least pitching-wise, to their younger players. And what have they done with it? Well, they've put themselves at a 71-56 overall record where they're sitting in a wild card spot, but they're sitting, 2 games out of the division crown with the Cleveland Guardians. So I think that's exactly what we've been talking about the Cardinals need to do, T-Bone, is cut payroll this season, walk away from some big hefty contracts, and hand the reins over to some younger players, i.e. Alec Burleson, Jordan Walker, Nolan Gorman, Victor Scott. The problem is what they did was they handed it over to the pitching staff, and the pitching staff pounced on it. The Cardinals seem to be in a position where their pitchers don't seem to be ready for this, but Kylie McDaniel, he told us yesterday, that's the spot you're in right now, where you're waiting for these guys to take the next step, but they're blocked from guys that you have at your major league level.
Yeah, and when I was looking at this for the Minnesota Twins and their kind of off-season, from last year, I don't think the Cardinals will do this on the pitching side. That's what I want to do it on the pitching side. Yeah, I don't think they have the arms ready to do this, so they probably won't do it. But this is kind of the formula that I think you can see for what they try to do with the offense this year. And I'm curious. I'm genuinely curious. Text line, would you want to see this kind of offseason? Because this is not a fun offseason for us to talk about, frankly, where you cut about $30 million in payroll, and it wouldn't shock me if that's the route the Cardinals go. And their free agency, Alex named basically their one free agent that they signed, is Carlos Santana, and they added a reliever for the league minimum, and they cut him about 30 games into the season, and he just got cut by the Cubs yesterday. That's it. That was the offseason. So I'm curious, text line, would you have interest in that kind of offseason if the Cardinals go that route of we're going to shed salary, and that's probably maybe that's trading a Nolan Arenado. Maybe that includes maybe trading one pitcher because they can't fill out the rotation with the young arms, but maybe they trade a Steven Matz or a Miles Michaels, one of those guys. And then the whole offseason isn't talk of, who do the Cardinals go out and get? Do they go out and sign this starting pitcher? Do they go out? Do they kind of hunt in that second tier of offensive players? No, they don't do that at all. They sit and they maybe add one contract that's a major league deal. Mm-hmm. When I saw, I was trying to think of what's a topic we can talk about the Minnesota Twins in this series. I saw what the Twins did last offseason, and I went, man, that feels like the direction the Cardinals are going. And if I'm being honest, it's probably the smart decision to do. Cut back payroll, turn over the offense to the young guys, have the veterans kind of eat up the innings for you in the right here and now. But, man, I said that that offseason doesn't sound fun as someone that has to, come up with content for our radio show.
But does it not sound...
But it feels necessary.
And I know it doesn't sound fun because a team doesn't sound like an exciting team. Frankly, doesn't sound like a playoff team. But I could argue the other side of it that it is exciting because that's the guys that you're relying on moving forward. Is it going to be exciting when this team is below 500 in May and you're talking about another lost season? Probably not. But I would argue that it's more exciting for Cardinals fans to see consistent at-bats for Walker, Gorman, Burleson, Victor Scott, Mason Wynn, Thomas Ajayce, all of these guys that have been hyped up to you. Seeing those guys on a consistent basis and seeing what that is going to look like in the future years, than going out there and just bringing in some older pitchers to fill out your rotation to at least pose as a contender, and then your offense trying to just cycle through a ton of veterans to get them at bats so that you can try and make the playoffs. I would argue that the latter, or the former, is the more exciting route, like the Minnesota Twins, because at least you see what the future looks like.
Exactly. And when you think about the constitution of the Twins lineup, too, in so many different ways, Tanner, you referenced bringing in Carlos Santana at the ripe young age of 38, and really no other exciting pieces. This is a team, guys, in that market, probably when you learned that Royce Lewis, the prized third baseman, was going to miss significant time, this was supposed to be your thunder in the middle of the order. He's played in a grand total of 49 games. You're no longer relying on a guy like Byron Buxton, frankly. He's 30 now, and he's been in and out of that order so frequently over the years. They're not relying on him anymore. Instead, it's turning over the keys to guys like Jose Miranda. It's Willie Castro, who's emerged this year as an all-star. But by and large, to your original point, Tanner, this team has been carried by Herculean pitching from the staff. The bullpen has been fine, too. They've allowed the offensive parts, different parts, to be able to have some exposure, get those relevant ABs. Now, I'm surprised myself. Yes, you're sitting here in late August and talking about a team that is somehow 15 games over 500, but it's the pitching first, and they're still getting contributions in the order. And most importantly of all, it's a balanced order from top to bottom, too. Maybe not a lot of majestic home run hitters, but there's balance, and they're doing it as a unit.
I think sorry, T-Bone, to cut you off. I think the difference with it, too, is like the Minnesota Twins. I guess if you're a fan of the Twins, this just seems like a regular occurrence where every year it's going to be, hey, we're going to have to go the cheap route. We're not going to be able to go after some of these big ones. Although they did go get Carlos Correa for them, so that's a bigger one.
And their expectation, if the TV deal wasn't right, because I was reading up on the Twins last night, and let me tell you, there was a lot of Twins fans that were not happy about their offseason.
Really?
I know, cutting payroll. Not a thing that fans like.
You're saying people don't like Carlos Santana for 1 year at $5.5 million?
No, not really. But what I found interesting was, because of what you were just about to mention there of, they don't typically spend a lot. They were like on the verge of spending a new franchise record in payroll. Like everything was going the right direction for them. And then the RSN situation pops up and ownership freaks out about it. I think what you're probably going to see a little bit here this offseason. Mm-hmm. And they say no more, the payroll's not going to be stagnant. It's not going up. It's dropping. And one thing that I found that was interesting based on stuff that I was reading last night on the Minnesota Twins is, in theory, when you say, okay, well, you got to cut $30 million of payroll, your first thought is, oh, my God, are you kidding me? We got to cut $30 million of payroll? So we basically have to sell guys on the cheap, like for the Cardinals. We'll use them as the example. We need to shed some payroll. So we got to trade Nolan Arenado and not really get anything in return. And you probably have to eat some of his contract. Maybe even have to trade a Wilson Contreras because he's the guy that might carry value, and you may not have to eat much of his contract if you were to move on from him. What I found interesting is a lot of the reporters that cover the Minnesota Twins said, in theory, you would think, okay, cutting $30 million would not be good for their front office, but it opened the front office's idea of doing more creative things. It was no longer, well, we can add this player. Well, no, now if you want to add a player, you got to get creative in doing it. You got to send out salary somewhere. You got to bring in somebody. You got to part with prospects to improve the major league team.
Finding a way to get Pablo Lopez from the Miami Marlins.
You need to find more creative avenues to try and improve the team. And that is one thing that we've talked about with the Cardinals is it's very kind of when we say Cardinals-y, what we mean by that is predictable. Mm-hmm. Sonny Gray. Look, great signing for the Cardinals this offseason. We loved it at the time. It was very Cardinals-y. We all kind of predicted it from the moment the offseason started. Kyle Gibson, Lance Lynn, we didn't predict that. But it was very Cardinals-y. It was very much a Cardinals-esque move of bringing in veteran guys like that. I think if you were a team that had to cut payroll, one thing that would maybe potentially become exciting for fans isn't just the prospect of, oh, we're going to see what the young offensive players look like. We're going to get to see Alec Burleson. We're going to get to see Jordan Walker, maybe. We'll get to see Victor Scott the second in the lineup every single day, and we'll find out what we have. But also it comes down to also how the Cardinals will try to also improve that roster, because I don't think if they try to go with the young guys, they're not just going to hand it all off to them and just say, let's see what we have. I think they'll want to try and still be competitive. So now if you're Mo and you're still the Pobo here, and I saw some fans on the text line say he's the one thing that has to change. And you know what? That's totally fair. If he's still the Pobo and he's still trying to build a playoff team in his final year of running the organization, he will now have to become more creative while cutting payroll. And I saw a lot of texts saying, well, Goldschmidt comes off of the book. How are you going to shed $30 million? You got to remember, Sonny Gray is going to get a significant increase. He goes from $10 million to $25 million this season. Yep. So you only save about $15 million there. Ooh. I think it's where it gets interesting with the Cardinals is, will they get creative? Not just let the young guys take the reins offensively, but will they be forced into more creative moves if they want to remain competitive? And maybe they don't, and it becomes a lot easier to kind of stomach.
And if you're trying to get rid of any of those other contracts, you're not just shedding all of the money, because you're going to have to eat some of that salary if somebody's going to take on a Nolan Arenado, a Miles Michaelis, things like that. Tanner Hendrickson, Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. Again, the Cardinals start a 3-game series against the Minnesota Twins tonight, a 7:10 first pitch. Coming up next, it is a Friday, which means we are here to answer your fantasy football questions. You send them over to us on our Air Comfort Service text line. We'll get the Fantasy Football Fridays next year on 101 ESPN.
You can now watch 101 ESPN live on our Air Alliance Team Studio Cams. Catch every show live on our YouTube channel or at 101ESPN.com. 101 ESPN Studio Cams.
Presented by the Air Alliance Team Heating and Cooling. Getting the job done quickly, correctly, 100% of the time.
It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, now is your time to win your fantasy football league. Be like me, not Tanner, who always loses his fantasy football league.
Back-to-back champ, baby.
With Tanner Hendrickson and Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. We are your fantasy football experts on a Friday. It is Fantasy Football Friday, so you send us any fantasy football questions. We will answer them for you now here on BK and Ferrario. 314-399-9646. Also, you could send them over on our YouTube chat, The Graveyard, at 101 ESPN. STL. I have my draft, my first one on Monday, and then ours at 101. That's the first week of September, I think, right after Labor Day.
Yeah.
So we've got them all coming up right now. So let's start with this one, guys. From the 314, did I wait too long to draft a quarterback? I took Jaden Daniels. Don't know if that's, it's not great, but at least you've got upside.
Yeah, and he's looked okay, I think, so far from the videos I've seen from camp, what you've kind of seen. I think he's played in the preseason, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
I thought I remember
they just told him he's not playing this last preseason game.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Which should give you excitement so he doesn't get hurt.
Now, it does hurt that Dotson got traded. That trade is going to hurt him because now his only target really is Terry McLaurin.
Yeah, scary Terry.
But I don't mind that. It may end up coming back to bite you. Assuming you're not in the deep league, though, you might be able to move on and try and find somebody on waivers later on in the year. I don't necessarily mind the draft, though, of Jaden Daniels, as long as you load it up on, top-end wideouts and top-end running backs.
You got to have elite somewhere.
Yeah, you got to be elite in one other area if you were going to go short a quarterback, which I'm assuming you did. If that's the case, I think you're going to end up being fine.
Man, if we were talking about a dynasty league, I would be all over this. Although I will say, guys, I'm not feeling all of this love nationally for Washington potentially being a dark horse contender or at least fringe 500 team in the NFC East. I'm not seeing that, even with a jumbled division, even with all of the unrest in Dallas and not really knowing what you're going to get out of the Giants. I'm not seeing the love, especially at a lot of the skill positions. If you're really drafting fantasy, to me, yes, you still have scary Terry, obviously, Alex, but with the exception of Daniels, maybe later rounds too, there's just not a lot of meat on the bone there for me.
From the 618, guys, who are your ride or die guys this year? That was an air quote, or not an air quotes, it was an actual quote. So I'm assuming these are the guys that you're going to stick with no matter what. I always find myself, my ride or die are typically either one elite wide receiver or one quarterback because it's the position that you just really can't move on from. Like last season, my guy was Justin Fields in our Superflex League. I couldn't get anything else, and so Justin Fields was it. Now, he did me good for a couple of weeks, and then a couple of weeks he does bad. I'll tell you one guy, though, that I do think is going to be very critical to somebody's fantasy football season this year, and it's Jahmyr Gibbs. The way Dan Campbell is painting Jahmyr Gibbs, like last year, he frustrated the hell out of me because the first 6 weeks, he's the reason I stunk for so long because he was never used. The way they make it seem like he's going to be used this year is kind of like a Christian McCaffrey, to where not all the time red zones are more than likely going to be David Montgomery, but getting to the red zone, that is going to be a whole lot of Jahmyr Gibbs as a check down option.
Yeah, I do like that one. I still worry about David Montgomery getting the ball inside the red zone.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that really worries me about him. Looking at guys, because I typically wait on running backs a little bit later because I am a go all in on the wideouts. That's kind of what I try to target first, and I'll settle on running backs later on in drafts. Guys that I am kind of riding and dying with this season, I'm targeting Isaiah Pacheco again. He was the guy I targeted last year. I ended up with him in our league. He's consistent. He's RB1. He's a guy that's going to just constantly put up the points that you need. 10, 12, basically going to sit there every single day. Is there a ton of upside in that pick? No, but I like to kind of just go with what I can write in pen. He's going to be consistent. I'm going to get that from him. The other running back that I kind of really like this year is I'm still sticking with James Cook. I still think maybe you see them try to establish the run a little bit better this year.
For sure.
And one that I am starting to kind of push myself towards, more in best ball than in just your typical fantasy league, Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals, the former Illinois running back. I saw today a report coming out of Cincinnati that he is now starting to get more reps on the first team over Zach Moss. So he's a guy I'm keeping an eye on. And then with the wideouts, I don't think you can ever go wrong pretty high up in the draft. I am going to be looking for, and I see Bradford's got him pulled up on his computer over there, Amon-Ra St. Brown to me is steady Eddie when it comes to fantasy football.
Every year.
Goodness. And there's so much room I still think for him to grow as well, guys, I love Gibbs, certainly too, Alex, but when I think about all of the firepower there in Detroit and still being able to have that continuity on offense with the coordinator staying put for at least one more season, this is somebody who last year he played through injury. He missed just one game. He already in year number 3 had 164 targets. That number to me, yes, I know that there are other threats there, but it could balloon even more. And if he's able to raise that touchdown number, Tanner, above 10 and maybe get to that 12-14 range, which is not out of the realm of possibility, considering that the Lions at least know who their quarterback is going to be, that there aren't questions maybe surrounding a Jefferson in Minnesota. I'm sorry, I'm not on the Darnold train. Even when you take it over to Cincinnati, Chase, with the contract talks and whatnot, Devontae Adams in Las Vegas, does anybody think that he's going to be even remotely happy there with O'Connell? No, Amon-Ra St. Brown is as safe as it gets, but with upside to boot.
Yeah, and one other guy out of the tight end market, I'm not waiting to take this guy and have him be my one tight end because, one, he's going to be out for like the first couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah.
I want TJ Hockenson in my draft. He's going to be a guy I'm targeting late as a guy that I'm going to store on my bench, place him on IR in my IR spot, and then when he is healthy, now you're right, Sam Darnold makes me worry about this a little bit more. I was a little more opportunistic when they had potentially J.J. McCarthy taking over at some point this year, but T.J. Hockenson is one of the best tight ends, fantasy purposes, in that offense, so he's a guy that I am definitely targeting late in rounds to kind of store on the bench till he gets healthy.
Yeah, I'd worry more about Jets than Hockenstein because at least you can go underneath with him.
Yeah.
From the 314, I'm in a keeper league, 12-man PPR, and I have the 5th overall pick. Do I keep Laporta, Derrick Henry, Kyron Williams, Devontae Smith, or Brandon Ayuk? Ooh, 5th overall pick. I
say those back names again.
Kyron Williams, Devontae Smith, or Brandon Ayuk. I think if I was with the 5th overall pick, golly, all of those, man, are a little tough.
I'd keep Laporta. Best tight end in the game. If they will allow you to keep Sam Laporta, I'd keep him. Best tight end in the game, and with the 5th pick, you can then end up taking another wide receiver. Now you've got a 1-2 punch in the position I find most important, which is guys that catch the football.
It's the first-round pick, though, man. I think if I were going through these, Laporta, Devontae Smith, or Brandon Ayuk would be the 3 that I would consider. But, man, all of those, Laporta would probably be the best of the bunch because you're getting an elite player at a position that there's only probably a couple of those guys that you can pull from in this. Let's get a couple more of these. From the 417, I like this. How do I convince the lame guys in my fantasy league that a draft party is way better than online drafts? So I do both of these. We do online with 101 because there's like 1,200 people in it, and it's hard to get everybody's schedule. I prefer the live ones no matter what. We do a live one. My family does one. It's 10 guys that do it for the last 5-6 years. That is more fun because you can talk-ish throughout the whole thing. You can mess around with people, and you can kind of pressure guys into making bad decisions. At home online, like, people have their stuff, and you just go at it. I prefer in-person all the time.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any tips to convince those guys because it sounds like they're pretty sold on online, but I do enjoy kind of the in-person ones because it's kind of fun when you get that surprise pick too. You know, somebody's always going to reach on somebody, or there's going to be a move that happens that kind of surprises everybody. It's always fun to kind of get the reaction around the room of, oh, what are you kind of thinking? What are you going to do? To your point, kind of talking smack while you're there as well. I do enjoy in-person ones. I do think those are better than the online.
My family is notorious for just destroying individuals for 2 minutes while they decide on what to do.
Yeah,
10 seconds
that doesn't
in,
surprise me.
10 seconds in, my dad is just like, make a pick already, damn it. Come on.
You can't replicate that type of pressure in an online setting. Now, I will say, it's online, or excuse me, in person all the way, as long as you're still staying pretty rigid about the timer. Now, if you're a little more loose, it depends on your group, obviously, on your setting, on your league. But as long as you're keeping that in the 90-second to 2-minute range, I think that is key because then the strategy really comes into play.
All right, let's do this last one from the 618. How do I pick a good fantasy football league team name? I think there are 2 options for this, and you're talking to the king of nicknames. You either need to get a player that's on your team play on words.
That's a good one.
Or it needs to be making fun of somebody that's in your fantasy league.
That's also a good one. Because
our 101, my team is called the BKOs. Yeah. And the BKOs have beaten BK multiple times in fantasy football head-to-head. And the other one is Sherlock Mahomes because I have Patrick Mahomes on it.
Oh, I like that.
So
that's actually pretty good.
Those are your two options.
See, I'm terrible with the play on words because I've been trying to come up with that over the last 2 years. Thankfully, ChatGPT is now a thing.
That's
so
true.
I'm probably going to just use that for my fantasy football team this year because mine's been just generic and lame. T-bone crushers, it's kind of blah. I'm hoping to change it this year. But yeah, I would go play on words with a player name, or like you're saying, kind of go after one of the guys in your fantasy football league.
At the risk of putting you guys on the spot, when the league inevitably considers expansion college football playoff style, what does somebody have to do over here? Accrue a little more tenure? What does somebody have to do? I'm a veteran. You want to see my medals in Yahoo and ESPN?
Make BK feel guilty because technically everyone's allowed into our league with BK. So just make him feel guilty and you'll be a part of it, Bradford.
Former champion. That's all I'm saying.
Don't tell that to T-Bone over here who thinks he's always the champion. With the champion.
I am always. I'm back to back in the 2 years we've done
No, it's not a good enough excuse. I'm second. I'm runner-up. Tanner Hendrickson, Bradford Bruns. I'm Alex Ferrario. We'll be back next Friday with more of your fantasy football questions. Coming up next, though, what is going to be the identity of the Blues team this season? It's a question that I feel like we asked every single week last year. Frankly, for the last 2 seasons, it's been, what's the identity of this team? I actually think it's pretty clear-cut. We'll get to that next on 101 ESPN.
Coverage of 101 ESPN is presented by Onder Law Injury Lawyers. GetJim.com. Catch the Balloon Party with Tim McKernan and Action Jackson. Weekdays from 10 to 11 a.m. on 101 ESPN. The fastest hour of sports radio is driven by Munganast and Burkhardt Alton Toyota. 101 ESPN Sports Center.
Cards back in interleague business. I'm Bradford Bruns with your Sports Center update, brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. Tonight at 7:10, St. Louis takes on AL Central Power Minnesota. Andre Palante looks to stifle a Twins lineup that has pushed the team 15 games over 500. Ali Marmol's crew has that 63-64 mark after snagging 2 of 3 from Milwaukee. College football, Dublin style. Number 10 Florida State tackles Georgia Tech tomorrow. Mizzou opens its campaign next Thursday versus Murray State. Defensive personnel will be different, but opening drive guest Mike Kelly is pretty optimistic about Corey Batoon's unit.
My point regarding depth can be underscored like this. You have a 5-star freshman who's on the scout team in Williams-Winneri.
Wow.
So there's an opportunity for him to continue to mature through practicing with the scout team because there's older, veteran, more mature players in front of him.
This Sports Center update was brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
Giving you the picture, the real big St. Louis sports picture. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
Some of you are incredible with these fantasy football names, but what I have learned about our Air Comfort Service text line is, yes, the play on words works, but just try and be as dirty as possible. Filth and play on words is how you get a great fantasy football name, is what I've learned from the Air Comfort Service text line. With Tanner Hendrickson and Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. So it's the question that I feel like Blues fans have been asking about this team really since they lost in the second round against the Colorado Avalanche. What's their identity? For the longest time, it felt like that the Blues were adopting a new speed identity that really never panned out for this team. You know, the Mike Hoffman, they brought in certain guys that could amp up the aggressiveness, and it just felt like they always fell flat, speed versus physicality. To me, I think it's very obvious what their identity is, and it goes into even more of clarification once they bring in Dylan Holloway. It's physicality with their team. Like, they're going back to the physicality of their forwards. You're going to have guys like Pavel Buchnevich. Now you've brought in Dylan Holloway, Braden Shen. You've got Matthew Joseph. You've got Radek Faksa. You've also got some of these other guys that fill into your bottom six that bring the tenacity of winning puck battles in the offensive zone. But the more important identity I feel like that the Blues have identified as a problem and fixed it quickly is size on defense. Broberg, to me, is Doug Armstrong righting his wrong from the last few seasons. And it's not just Broberg. Last year, it was trying to bring in Travis Sanheim from the Philadelphia Flyers. They're going size on D. There's no more of this, well, we feel like the smaller offensive-minded defensemen are how you win in the NHL. Go look at the last couple of Stanley Cup champions, the Vegas Golden Knights, the Florida Panthers, the Colorado Avalanche. There was no small stature defensemen. They all brought in players, with the exception of Cale Makar, guys who were 6'3" and beyond. And now look at where the Blues stand, not just for the now, but for the future. You've got Philip Broberg, who's 6'3". You've got Matt Kessel, who's 6'3". You've got Colton Parayko, who's here for the long term. You've got Adam Jiricek, who you just drafted. They just drafted multiple defensemen who stand at 6'3" and beyond. The only small stature defenseman that'll be here in the long term is Theo Lindstein. So I think what the Blues did is they've identified what their problems were in the past, and it's adding more physicality in terms of winning puck battles offensively. But it's righting the wrong that was, we thought small stature defensemen helps teams win, and no longer do we feel that way. Now it's all about going out there and making sure our defense is big.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into what I kind of think their identity is going to be as a team. And I think it is they're going to want to try and get into, I'd almost call it like slugfest. You know, the goal is going to be to keep these games low scoring, dump the puck in, try and get after it, try and battle. No longer this kind of pond hockey style that it felt like they were playing kind of over the last 2 seasons, especially in the second half 2 years ago when they had Jakub Vrana. I think their goal this season, to your point, is defensively. They've got some size. They should be able to really limit space once they're in their defensive zone this year. And I think for the forwards, it's kind of that back to dump it in, go after it, and try and get the puck. And really the only line that may not be that is maybe the top line when it's Kyrou, Thomas, and Neighbors. They may try to play a little bit faster if that ends up becoming the top line this season. But I think for the most part, it's that old school kind of get in, get on the forecheck, see if we can pin them in their own zone, and then see if we can create offense out of that. I think they're going to get back to that kind of slugfest style hockey that they really played when they were having success with Craig Berube. That's kind of what I expect their identity to be this season, and I think they've positioned themselves both better for that this year, and also, to your point, are righting the wrong of trying to get away from that when that was what made them successful, whatever it is now, 5 years ago.
Yeah, well, and on the physicality side of it for the forwards, I think it's very important to put this out in the front, too. That is still remained to be seen, because, like, the main guys that you're relying on are still Kyrou and Buchnevich, and for the time being, Brandon Saad, Braden Shen. Like, a lot of these younger players, you're a couple of years away. But that's why I feel like if we're talking about identity moving forward, that's what they're trying to get back to. Because Bolduc said it with us last year at the end of the season, how he was going into the offseason adding size and strength so that he could win more puck battles.
And when I say kind of that that physical style, I don't necessarily mean like hitting guys on the boards, not doing the Sammy Blais. You know, I'm not saying they just skate around and hit people. I'm saying they go in there, go into the zone, and they go in with a purpose. Whether that is hit guys into the boards, or they just pin them to the boards and just try and keep the puck and possess it, to your point. And that's what Bolduc was talking about. I don't think Bolduc was like, I'm going to get bigger so I can run through some defensemen.
Absolutely.
No, he's getting there so he can go in, retrieve the puck, hold it, get them pinned in the zone, and now you hope to create some offense while you're on the forecheck.
It's the cycle game. You can only use the cycle game if you're going to keep possession of the puck. And last year, look at how many guys you had on your team that got shoved off of the puck. Jakub Vrana couldn't hold on to the puck. Kapanen couldn't hold on to the puck. You had Nathan Walker playing in those roles. Nikita Alexandrov was getting some of those times. Now we're talking about having a Matthew Joseph, having a Radek Faksa, these two guys who have lived off of being bottom six forwards who hold on to the puck and create offensive zone time. Once again, it always comes back to your top players being top players. But as I talked about yesterday with you and BK, the only way you can do that is if you have a line that can get the puck back. And how many times last year did we see dump in, gets taken away by the other side, comes back, and now you're chasing again? Yeah. You don't chase if you have a line that you can put out there. At the end of the season, people were clamoring for more Nathan Walker, Alexei Toropchenko line combinations because they were the only ones that were getting the puck back. That's what you have now, at least in your bottom six. And that's why I think bigger picture, like when this team is competitive, that's what their identity is. Right now, they're still in the in-between. This is still a retool, and I think people need to understand that. I think you're on the back end of that retool with the acquisitions of Holloway and Broberg. But bigger picture, you've got a Holloway now. You've got a Bolduc. You've got a Dvorsky. These guys understand that physicality is how you win, and that's what you're implementing into a lineup.
Yeah, and I think you're right in terms of what they want to get back to. I think when they get back to kind of having that identity, because you're right, they still are in the retool. They're not there yet, but it feels like they're starting to mold back towards that identity. I still wonder if you're not going to have a top line that plays that way. And I think you can. I think that's fine.
I think you don't if you put Kyrou on it, which is why I don't want Kyrou on it.
But to that point, is there a line that Kyrou, if he's on it, would be that?
My ideal line combination to start the year would be Dylan Holloway, Braden Shen, and Jordan Kyrou. Holloway's the one that wants to play with physicality. Shen's your centerman. Kyrou's your shooter.
But as we talked about, I believe the other day, if I remember correctly, we were talking about Braden Shen, and you had mentioned, you still think he can play center in the top six, and we talked about that earlier.
At least early on.
Well, what was the reason that you had mentioned, like, why is it that Shen's getting so beat up in that center position? Well, he's got to dump it, and he's got to chase because it didn't have wingers. Well, that's the same issue you'd have if you have Kyrou on his line and Holloway.
You're right.
So like my point being is, if you have Kyrou, is there a line that you can put him on that isn't going to be I guess the word would be rush line. I don't know if it would necessarily be that. It's definitely not going to be one that we're talking about that gets in on the cycle, that is going in there and they're just trying to grind for the puck and keep a team pinned in their zone. It's going to have to be more of a speed line. And that's why, like, to our point, or our conversation earlier about, what Blue has the most to prove this season, reason I say Kyrou, and it's because of being a top-line winger, is because I don't know who else he could pair with, really, that works out well outside of Robert Thomas. Yeah. Because of what we're talking about. As
you got to adapt.
He can't, and maybe that's it. Maybe that's what he has to do. Because you said to me, well, does he have to be a 40-goal scorer? I said, no, but he's got to be able to play on a line with Thomas. He's got to be able to be defensively responsible. Maybe he does have to mold. The problem is I just don't know how much he can mold into being this kind of player.
But see, I don't know if you need to mold into it all the way, though, because I go back to the successful line that was Vladimir Tarasenko with St. Louis. It was the Schwarzschienko line. It was Jaden Schwartz, Braden Shen, and Vladimir Tarasenko. And that's kind of similar to a Holloway and Shen. Now, look, Shen's not the same type of player as he was at that time, but Shen was the centerman. Schwartz was the guy that would go in and get the pucks back, and Vladdy would be the roamer. And that's where I feel like I don't know if Holloway can do it. What I do know is Brandon Saad couldn't do it. And what I do know is when Kyrou was with Thomas and Buchnevich, you had Buchnevich trying to be the roamer, Kyrou trying to be the roamer, and nobody was going after the puck. And I don't want Pavel Buchnevich to be the puck retriever because Buch has got a shot. And that's why I've liked the Jake Neighbors combination of Thomas and Buch, because Neighbors is the guy that can go win puck battles and get to the front while Buch shoots. Will it work with Kyrou? Somebody texted in on Air Comfort Service text line and saying, guys, Braden Shen ruins Kyrou's speed. I disagree. I actually think the best Jordan Kyrou has been at times has been with Braden Shen because Shen's the guy who can set plays up. Kyrou is the guy that can shoot. You've got to find that other player, and that's what Brandon Saad was forced to be. And Brandon Saad just was never it because Brandon Saad was the guy that was waiting to get the puck.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of Vladdy being that guy that kind of was the roamer, you had said.
Yeah, I mean, that's your sniper. Your sniper is the Brett Hull mindset.
The thing with Vladdy, though, is like Vladdy could also shield you from the puck.
And he was thick.
Like, he was as much as we talk about his shot, and he was a goal scorer, and all of that is true. It also went under the radar of how well he could shield the puck. Yeah. And the thing with Kyrou is, I just don't know if he gets to that spot.
Yeah, he can't.
And that's where it is. Can they get fully into this mindset that we're talking about as being a puck retrieving team that's going to try and get in on the cycle? Do they need all four lines to do that, or can they get away with it if they have three lines doing it? And then the top line is playing more of the speed game, where it is they're not really necessarily dumping and chasing after the puck. They're just trying to come through the neutral zone and get in on the offensive zone and try and score. I think you can do that with one line. I really do. But that's where it becomes a question of if this is where they are pushing towards, and they ultimately end up saying, you know what, we actually do need all four lines to be puck retrieving, getting on the cycle. I don't know how Jordan Kyrou fits in that because I don't think he can ever become. I think he can become Vladdy in terms of the point production and goal scoring. I don't know if he can become Vladdy in terms of he's going to be in the offensive zone. He's going to shield off guys from the puck because we've seen it. He's just not big enough to do that. He can be shoved off by these big defensemen, and they can take the puck from him.
Yeah, and I do think there are teams that do successful groups that has one line that's just their speed line, and that could be the case. The question's really who else is on that line, because Robert Thomas isn't fast. You're not using speed with him. I know people want Dalibor Dvorsky with Kyrou, but I'm not going inexperienced centerman with a defensively lacking player. Like, you got to pick and choose right now.
When we say fast, I don't know if it necessarily has to be just his skating.
It's fast with the mind.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where Robert Thomas can make up for it.
You're right.
He doesn't have the speed of Kyrou in terms of skating ability, but he can move the puck fast. Yeah. And that's where you can see where he can kind of blend into that speed line.
One more thing that I did want to mention before we get to the junk drawer, because I get labeled as the Blues honk, the Blues homer that's just sitting here optimistically thinking that they're going to be great every single season. And that's not the case. I do want to temper expectations for Blues fans because I know it's exciting with Broberg and Dylan Holloway. I know it's exciting thinking that this team's a playoff team. And I do believe they're a fringe playoff team. There's a chance that they miss the playoffs. There's a chance that they sneak in as the 8th team in the Western Conference. But one thing I do think Blues fans need to keep in the back of their mind is there are a lot of new faces on this team this season. And the last time that this happened where there were a lot of new faces on a team was 2018-2019. I'm not comping this team to going on a second half run and winning a Stanley Cup. What I am comping them to is the first half of that season. Remember, Darren Pang had told us, I believe it was during the season last year, about that Cup championship team. And he said, at the beginning of the season, on paper, it looked like they were going to be good, but you had a lot of guys who had a lot of egos, who had a lot of different mindsets. And it took Craig Berube coming in to getting them all on the same page. You've got Matthew Joseph, Radek Faksa, Alexander Texier, Dylan Holloway, Philip Broberg, all new faces, Ryan Suter, all new faces on this Blues team that was already kind of in an in-between state. I do think there's going to be growing pains at the beginning of the season, of guys that have been to the Stanley Cup final in years past that think hockey one way, and a group of players that have been here and been struggling for the last couple of years think another way. Sometimes those are two types of players that butt heads, but I also believe that is beneficial for a group to kind of get on the same page at some point. Is it going to be pretty? Probably not all season, but do they have that point where it's this is successful, now let's start building this way? That's the blueprint that I think is in front of them potentially.
Yeah, and I think on that point, it'll be interesting to see how Drew Bannister can communicate with these guys. Because you mentioned Craig Berube. Yeah. Look, my whole thing on guys trying to fit into roles and stuff is put on the big boy pants. You're an NHLer.
Absolutely.
Figure it out. Do what you think is best for the team. Well, who's the guy that's got to sell that message? It's Drew Bannister. And there's a reason he brought in Claude Julien to be on this coaching staff, was to not just be like the rookie coach that guys kind of look at and say, do we really want to listen to this guy? He's a rookie head coach in the NHL. Does he really know what he's talking about? Hey, he's got experience on the coaching staff. He's also got a guy in Steve Ott that played in the NHL. So to me, it comes down to, can Bannister get these guys pushing in the right direction, and how long does it take him to do that? That will be the kind of key to kind of watch this season. I'm not necessarily too worried about it because I think that'll kind of all work itself out. But it is something to keep an eye on, and especially because you've got a rookie manager in Drew Bannister.
And that's where I do think it's beneficial to have Claude Julien a part of this team. It just comes down to kind of how much impact takes place on that coaching staff. With Tanner Hendrickson and Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up in 15 minutes, we're going to get into Victor Scott and what's the best way to handle him down the stretch. But coming up next, we dive into the junk drawer here on 101 ESPN.
101 ESPN has your shot to score a pair of tickets to the Blues home opener against the Wild, October 15th at Enterprise Center. Blues hockey is right around the corner, and single game tickets for the 2024-25 season are on sale now. Don't miss exciting new theme nights and can't miss giveaways this season. Get all the details and enter to win a free pair of tickets for the Blues home opener now at 101ESPN.com or on your 101 mobile app.
Drinking and driving will change your whole world. Whether you get pulled over or get into a crash, things will never be the same. Getting a sober ride will change your world for the better. Drive sober or get pulled over. Paid for by NHTSA.
Back to more of it. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN. Let's open it up. The Junk Drawer with BK and Ferrario.
Brought to you by Fenton Bar and Grill. Best trashed wings in Missouri. Dine in, carry out, 7 days a week.
With Tanner Hendrickson and Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. We do dive into the junk drawer, and T-Bone's got a story for us today.
Hey, you guys ever wanted to go to Alaska for like a vacation?
I've never been interested in it. My parents are actually there right now on a cruise.
Oh,
and they've been sending pictures, and I mean, it looks pretty cool. I just never really had an interest to go to Alaska.
I'll give it a go as long as I'm not truly roughing it out in the wilderness, although I don't know if that's feasible.
You kind of look like a grizzly man, you know? Like go out there and just survive.
I certainly give that striking impression,
You could pull that off, Bradford.
Each and every one.
I don't blame you for not wanting to do that, though. I saw this the other day while I was just kind of scrolling the interweb, and I was like, man, I want to go to Alaska. I wouldn't mind doing it. You know, cruise was probably the route that I would go. But this is another kind of idea that would be kind of just neat to say that I did. There is a Airbnb. We talked about they're doing like a series where you can stay at the inside, or sorry, not the inside, the up house.
Yeah.
They have like a series going on where they've got the up house you can stay at. Well, this guy in Alaska, in South Central Alaska, and I think it's called Wasilla, he bought 2 like old, not damaged, but just old planes that no longer fly, you know, airplanes. Mm-hmm. And he turned them into a house that you can rent on Airbnb that are in Alaska, you're in the wilderness, and you're staying at a house. So like the main kind of cabin area where basically you would sit on the plane. Yeah. That's the living room. The pilot's den that you would call it, or whatever the place where the pilot, the cockpit. Thank you. I was drawing a blank on the name for that. That is kind of the
part of an airplane.
It's kind of the spot for the breakfast area. You got the coffee that's over there. You've got
a tight spot to have
fridge.
Breakfast.
Yeah, well, there's nothing like, maybe breakfast spot's the wrong word, but it's got the coffee there. It's got kind of like a little refrigerator. There's no like stove in there.
Kind of like your kitchen area.
He turned this whole airplane into basically a house. It's got a bathroom, it's got a kitchen, it's got a family room, and on the wing of the plane, he's got a like outdoor grill area. Now he kind of built something on it. It's not just like a grill on a wing, but he just built a little area on there. There's a grill there. It's got a jacuzzi that's out there on the wing. I got to be honest with you.
I'd try that.
I would want to try just to say I did this, because I think it would be kind of a cool experience to see how this person turned this airplane into a livable house.
Well, how often could you say you lived or you stayed in an airplane for a weekend? Like,
sure,
everybody could say they stayed at an Airbnb. Oh, I stayed at a house that was themed as up. Cool, I could try that at my house. Like, how often could you say I freaking stayed at an airplane?
Yeah,
like that would be pretty awesome. Now, I would say I would get claustrophobia real quick.
That's the thing, is it like looking at
tight.
Here's kind of some of the photos for you.
So he took out all of the seats in the airplane.
All the seats are gone. There's there's like no seats on the airplane because he had to. He put flooring on there. He put a couch in there. There's a TV.
This is an ingenious idea to like rehab something like this. Do yourself a favor and go look at this website. It's an Airbnb that you could check out. T-Bone just pulled the pictures up. This is ingenious to just pull everything out. This is like those people that get school buses and rip it apart and rehab it and drive those around like on cross-country tours. I would do this in a heartbeat.
And because it's in Alaska, kind of out in the wilderness, he's kind of made it kind of almost cabiny too. You know, he got wood flooring, wooden doors on it.
Why not?
But to your point, like the family room does look kind of tight to me.
Yeah.
That would be one fear of mine, is it would start to feel kind of claustrophobic. But I would want to do it for just like a night.
I can more than respect the game, respect the resourcefulness, ingenious, perfect word to use here, Alex. However, I would still find myself in that setting, I kid you not, worry just a tad about one of those giant Kodiaks roaming through this particular area. Ever since I saw that 1997 movie, did you guys check it out? The Edge? Do you know the one?
Oh yeah, Sean Connery. Sean Connery.
You had Alec Baldwin.
Yeah.
Pre-Trump, pre-craziness.
I don't know the movie.
Sir Anthony Hopkins.
It's good.
You've got Kodiak bears out there just running amok, wreaking havoc. I'd still be frightened, guys. I'm not going to lie to you. No matter how enclosed I feel in this comfortable setting.
Yeah, I mean, if you live in Illinois, you're worried about bears coming to get you right now, so it doesn't matter where you go. I'm so jealous of those people that have that talent that can rehab something like that, because I wish I had that type of talent. Like, I try and rehab one area of my house and it falls apart. So
And it's so ingenious because it's big enough to where you can actually make it a house.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't make, I wouldn't think, a school bus that,
Yeah.
Like that's the thing.
I've seen some cool school buses.
You can turn a school bus into like a library or something that's really cool that would still be neat. This is like a legitimate house. You've renovated it. Like I see this and I go, man. And it truly is like in the middle of nowhere because you got to fit a plane somewhere in Alaska.
Yeah.
But it just would be like, oh, what'd you do? Well, we went on vacation to Alaska. Well, what'd you do? That was fun. We stayed in an airplane.
We'll tell Deep Pockets BK to schedule this for us.
A BK
this is a BK move. He'll totally do this.
We should do a BK and Ferrario trip to Alaska.
If we're doing a BK and Ferrario trip, it ain't going to be to Alaska.
Connection may be a bit shaky on the Wi-Fi front.
Oh, you think we'll have trouble doing the show from Alaska?
I don't even think they have Wi-Fi in Alaska. Tanner Hendrickson, Bradford Bruns. I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up next, Victor Scott has performed well in his second chance with the Cardinals. But what's the best way to handle him for the future consideration down the stretch? That and what is this outfield going to look like next year? We'll get to that next on 101 ESPN.
Stupiracy, the podcast where stupidity meets history and conspiracy.
I'm really confused. What are we doing?
With hosts Scott Rizzuto and Tim McKernan.
It's time to learn the truth.
Check out the latest episode, available now. As Riz and Tim dive into the wild conspiracy theory about the British royal family. The claim that Queen Elizabeth II was a cannibal?
I don't think I'm very hungry anymore.
From bizarre stories about her private freezer to tales of corpse medicine.
It's actually terrible medicine.
Discover the strange rumors that have swirled around the late Queen on the latest Stupiracy.
What is wrong with you?
Presented by Evergreen Wealth Strategies. Visit evergreenstl.com or call Mark at 314-889-0503. And by Brown & Crouppen, 222-2222 or getbc.com.
WXOS HD1 East St. Louis. 101 ESPN is driven by Auto Centers Nissan, home of the lifetime warranty and 30-day return. This is exactly where you want to be, listening to us. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
It's a challenge because all of these guys are unique. You can't treat them all the same. The problem is not the same. The solution is not going to be the same. And a lot of times you need to call these guys up to fix a short-term hole that will then hurt the long-term plan. And the reason I mentioned that Braves story, to bring it back around, is if you have a bunch of young players that haven't broken through but are kind of too good for AAA, but they're on the 40-man and you might need some help and you can't take them off the 40-man, you might have to call them up when they're not ready, and that might screw them up. And so trying to contend and also develop young players when it might take them a couple years to do it, but you don't have a couple years of letting them do it, there's that weird in-between line. And the Cardinals might be in that area because I think they see themselves as contenders in the sort of medium to long term. And so there's not always room for these players to figure it out if they're not going to be immediate contributors when they come up.
So that was Kylie McDaniel of ESPN, who joined us yesterday and gave us some great perspective from a front office view of handling prospects. And if you missed that or miss any of our content from today, you can check it out up on the podcast page after the show today, 101ESPN.com, always presented by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers. And what Kylie was talking about really applied more to what the Cardinals have done with Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman this season. Jordan Walker was supposed to be a fixture, started off bad, sent him to the minors, and honestly did what Kylie was talking about. It just kept him there and let him work, despite us being upset about it. But then when there was a temporary need, which wasn't a need, but the Cardinals said it was, they brought him up. And they played him 4 games, and then they said, nope, we don't need you anymore, send you back down to the minors. Nolan Gorman, you kept him here for the longest time, and it just wasn't working out, and he was filling the void for you, and it was like, nope, we're going to send you back down. And now you get to Victor Scott. And Victor Scott is just another one of those examples. I think they handled it right at the beginning of the season where you started him off and you said, hey, let's see what this kid's got. Didn't look good, sent him down, let him just stay in the minors. And then when Michael Ciani went down, the Cardinals said, we need a temporary fix. We need a center fielder who can play good defense. Let's bring Victor Scott up. Now, look, Victor Scott has been okay since his recall this season. Like, he's had some competitive at-bats. He goes 3 for 4 yesterday, which might be terrible timing by us by bringing this up. He's fixed whatever it is. But that still doesn't put him in the category of tearing it up in the minors and making it seem like, well, his next step is the major leagues, T-Bone. So what's the best way to handle Victor Scott going down the stretch? Because Michael Ciani is going to be back at some point. And I do not believe that they're going to put Michael Ciani in one of the corner outfield spots, nor should they put Victor Scott in one of the corner outfield spots because he's developing, he's growing as a center fielder. But I also don't see this team putting Michael Ciani on the bench as a backup center fielder for how he's played this season. And I hope they don't put Victor Scott on the bench as a 4th outfielder.
Yeah, when I was thinking more last night about what Kylie had told us, and you're right, we were focused on Walker and Gorman because they were kind of the newsy guys. They were the ones that had just recently been sent down. I couldn't help but think about Victor Scott because why is he here at the big league level right now?
Fixing a void.
Yeah, it's filling the void of Michael Ciani's injury. It's not that Victor Scott really earned his way back up here to the big leagues. And that's not a shot against him because he was playing pretty well when they called him up. I like the idea of, hey, call him up while he's playing well. Ryan Ludwig helped him with his swing. He's been on a little bit of a heater. Let's call him up. But it was mostly because, there's a void right now in our center field spot. We have a need. He's on the 40-man. He plays really good defense. We should call up Victor Scott II. And when you look at Victor Scott's numbers since the call-up, they really got inflated yesterday because of that 3 for 4 game. You look at the slash line, 238, 256, 381, 637 OPS.
If that was Jordan Walker, the Cardinals would be saying, get this guy back to the minors immediately.
It's not a great slash line. It's clear he's still a little overpowered by some major league pitching. Now, look, maybe yesterday was the game that kind of turns this around. Maybe you see him go on a little bit of a run. But I think now is when they need to be having that conversation of, okay, what is the plan with Victor Scott II for the rest of the season? Because you're right. Michael Ciani, he's going to probably start a rehab, I would assume, next week is the way it kind of sounds.
He'll probably be back by September when they advance those rosters.
Yeah, and then you expand rosters. But if you're dealing with Victor Scott II and you feel like he's going to be the everyday center fielder for you moving forward, and look, they just say, hey, we need his defense to be there. I think he also needs to be at least slightly below league average hitter for them. And this year he hasn't been that. And again, he was a little overmatched. He's still working on things. I think they need to figure out what their plan is going to be for Victor Scott II, because if they needed to, they could get away with going with Nootbaar in center field. Yeah. They can figure out how to construct the outfield that way. You could put Burleson in right, go Nootbaar in center, and Tommy Pham in left field, and then you have Victor Scott II that could be down in the minor leagues, continuing to play or playing what he's doing here at the big league level, but really developing and working on things. I think if he's here for the mainstay of the rest of the season, he's got to be a guy that's in the lineup every single day, to your point, even when Michael Ciani comes back.
Well, go ahead, Bradford.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, because if you project and move forward here, where exactly are the Cardinals going to be when Ciani is indeed ready to return to the lineup? Now, prior to the injury, he was taking markedly better ABs and giving you markedly better plate appearances, Ciani that is. But coming off of, obviously, the absence, the injury-related absence, too. Even with, Tanner, to your point, yesterday's 3-hit outing, Scott still, for the month of August, he's hitting just .222. And yet, it's very enticing to think about what he could do if given the opportunity to run with the bottom spot in that order for successive weeks. If you, for all intents and purposes, you're not playing for anything down the stretch. That's the fine line. A couple of weeks from now, where are they going to be? Then I would much rather, Alex, see him up here through the duration of September as opposed to shipping him out potentially again. He plays out the string, if you will, in Memphis. That regular season concludes on September 22nd. Because what do you have to lose? Much like in the beginning stages of the regular season, there is a very specific reason, a set of reasons why this guy was your opening night center fielder out there in Chavez Ravine. It's because he is considered the centerpiece in center field moving forward. And for me, guys, at least personally, my personal level, I'm over the, even for a short amount of time, a short stretch of Lars Nootbaar in center field. You know what he is at this point. You know exactly what he is. So let's explore the future possibilities in the here and now.
And to make sure we're clear, Scott is playing every day while he's up here.
Yeah, he's got everyday opportunities.
But the reason that I thought it was worth having this conversation is, okay, it looks like they're going to stick with that until Ciani comes back. My wonder, though, is because you've seen him look overmatched again here at the big league level, is this what's best for him in his development? Because I do believe he's probably, and I think they're viewing it internally in the organization as, he's probably their future center fielder. And it's not like, I don't know what his ceiling is in terms of his bat, but he had impressive power numbers last year when you look at the minor leagues. Mm-hmm. Now, it was only 7 home runs in Double-A, but he did slug .450 and got on base at a .373 clip. Like, he has been a guy that can drive the baseball. And what we've seen at the big league level is he gets under the ball a lot. He doesn't have the Jordan Walker problem where he gets on top of it. He gets under it a little too much.
Right.
And the reason that I think it's an interesting conversation is the whole reason he's up here right now is because of a need. It's not because it's, oh, okay, we think this is what's best for his development is to be up here at the big league level. I think he's overmatched. I think it's interesting to see how they're going to handle him. I think he is going to be the starting center fielder until Ciani comes back. Then it is a question of, do we continue to ride with Victor Scott, and is his development best suited here at the big leagues, or is it best suited for him to go back down to AAA and continue to develop?
I mean, he's looked good, but he has not shown me you're ready to be an everyday major leaguer. And that's why I would send him back to the minors and tell him, go play every day, every game, center field for us. Because next year's where it's important. And like when Ciani comes back, and even right now, like the whole purpose of you acquiring Tommy Pham was to get a right-handed bat that could play the outfield, potentially center field if you needed him to. Like, you've got your outfielders that you can run with the rest of the season. It's pretty evident that they like to run with the veterans right now. You've got Tommy Pham, you've got Lars Nootbaar, you've got Alec Burleson, you've got Brendan Donovan. Like, these guys can play the outfield for you. Jose Fermin can even play the outfield for you. His bat has obviously helped them out in the short sample size. Like, I think 2025 is important, and I know that this is the mindset of, like, forfeiting in 2024 and focusing on 2025. But, like, what's your outfield look like right now? Tommy Pham's not a part of it next year, at least in my opinion. Michael Ciani's a fourth outfielder for you next year. My outfield next season, which should be set it and forget it, is Lars Nootbaar in left, Victor Scott in center, and Jordan Walker in right. That's my outfield for 2025. And until Victor Scott was hitting .219 with a .302, .319, .621 slash line in Memphis this season.
Yeah.
That doesn't scream major league ready. That's exactly what Jordan Walker was doing. In fact, Jordan Walker was probably a little bit worse than that for the longest time in Memphis, with a little bit better of a slug. I think if we're talking about what's best for Victor Scott's development, it's what Kylie McDaniel told us yesterday. You put him in the minors until he is there consistently as your starting center fielder in good and in bad. And right now, it feels like that in bad, Victor Scott's coming out of the lineup. And when Michael Ciani's ready, Victor Scott's coming out of the lineup. That doesn't tell me that you're planning on him being your everyday center fielder. It tells me you need something to get you through. And when you get through, you send him back down. Send him back down now.
Yeah,
let him get reps.
Looking at his numbers, because I saw we got a text from the Air Comfort Service text line of, well, what are you guys telling me? What's the difference? Scott's hitting 230, and you want to replace him when Ciani comes back, who's hit 200. Well, Ciani's hitting 250 and looks like a major league bat. You know, he can hit right-handed pitching. Lefties is where he has really struggled. And I'm not saying that he's, like, tearing the world on fire when Ciani was in the lineup. But when you look at Victor Scott, you take out yesterday's number since he's been recalled because he was 3 for 4. And again, maybe it is maybe there's something that has clicked after that game. We'll see. I'm assuming he's going to be in the lineup tonight. Victor Scott was 171 and a 483 OPS. He was outmatched here at the big league level. So my concern is because they view him as the future center fielder, to your point, I wonder what is best for his development. Is it to be up here? Is it to be facing big league pitching where he is kind of outmatched? And the reason he is up here is because the Cardinals do have a need, because they do not have Michael Ciani. That I think it's worth having a conversation about, because Victor Scott, when he is right down in the minor leagues, he's not a guy that is going to, I don't think when he gets to the big leagues in his prime, is going to be a guy that's going to put up Jordan Walker-esque numbers that you're expecting, or what you expect, or what you saw from Lars Nootbaar when he was healthy last year.
He's a different type of player.
But he's probably a league average guy that drives the baseball, has a little bit of pop, hits for some doubles, hits for a little bit of average, and is able to steal second base because of his great speed. My problem, though, is are they setting back his bat by having him up here right now when they could be getting away with a Lars Nootbaar in center field? Because the reason he's up here is because they believe that they're still in playoff contention, and they're fighting for their playoff lives. It's the whole reason he's up here. It's the whole reason Jordan Walker was sent back down when they're going through the stretch against right-handed pitching. I just wonder how much they are setting back Victor Scott, and it does worry me a little bit because I do think he is their future starting center fielder. Next year, it probably still is Michael Ciani. 2 years from now, it should be Victor Scott, and he should be getting everyday reps at the AAA level to work on his bat.
Yeah, defensive heroics notwithstanding, in April and May, Ciani was such a convenient target for so many fans because of the lack of offense. But you cannot dispute that in July, the guy hit 310. In June, the guy hit 277. Now, I am intrigued to see what he's able to produce after the injury-induced time off. But to your point, Alex, going back for just a second to next year's outfield and the alignment from left to right. You mentioned, of course, Nootbaar, Scott potentially, and Walker out there. To what extent are you confident in penciling in? I'm going to say penciling in a Lars Nootbaar, because I'm looking not only at the surface level statistics without diving too much into the analytical side, but when you break it down, you're going to be referring to yet another season, third straight, when he was scheduled to be slated to be an everyday important presence in your lineup. And this is somebody who, once again, isn't even going to crack 120 games played. To me, it begs the question, depending on what you opt to do with Nolan Gorman, is Brendan Donovan the person on whom you have to count in left field?
No, Brendan Donovan's my second baseman next year.
All right.
Because I'm not counting on Nolan Gorman. I don't know what their plan is for Nolan Gorman. Maybe it changes, but Nolan Gorman, it seems they only use in certain situations. He might be your DH next year, platoon bat. I mean, unfortunately for this team, I think Lars Nootbaar has to be written in pen because of the uncertainty of Jordan Walker. Now, I would say that he's in pen for next season, but now you're getting to the point where you're starting to diminish in outfielders in terms of who you can use there. Donovan obviously is going to be a utility guy. My guess is the Cardinals don't trade away Nolan Gorman, because if they're going off of cost control, well, that's a cheap second baseman that does have 40 home run potential for you. The same can be said about Lars Nootbaar. Compared to what you'd be filling that void with in terms of an outfielder, I think he's there for you. I think your four outfielders next season are Scott, Nootbaar, Walker, and Michael Ciani, and Donovan as a utility type of player who could be out there.
Yeah, I don't know if Scott's ready for the big leagues next year. I think it's Ciani.
If you go
is
the
there
youth
another
movement,
year.
though, I think he should be.
I'm not sure that's necessarily the case for me because, like, I don't want to set him up in a really bad situation. You know, like right now.
But is it a bad situation off of what Kylie said in terms of you don't have somebody taking over that void for him and you just letting him play?
They have a guy, though, that can play center field right now.
Yeah.
That in Michael Ciani. You know, their outfield as a whole is a bit of a mess. Like, they could, if they wanted to, get away with putting Donovan in the outfield. Or if they think Walker needs another season at AAA, for example, they can go out and sign an outfielder on the cheap. You know, that $5 million, we talked about the Twins and having a Twins-esque offseason from last year. Well, you know, the Twins deal for Carlos Santana was $5 million. You can find an outfielder for $5 million.
Yeah.
I know, can play the corners.
I know that's a legitimate line of thought as far as more seasoning. What would another full campaign in AAA do? But if you are entering the offseason, if you're even entertaining that notion, that sliver of an idea that perhaps another lion's share of a season needs to be spent for Jordan Walker in Memphis, you have bigger questions to answer.
Yeah.
Find out. But right now, it seems it's the fix for the here and now until Michael Ciani is back. But then by that point, I think when Ciani's back, you're talking about the September call-ups, and it could be really not the point anymore. With Tanner Hendrickson and Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. 15 minutes, we'll get to One's Gotta Go, a Friday staple. But coming up next, as we go into the first weekend of college football, let's do a little bit of rankings throughout the Power 4 conferences and what the season predictions look like. We'll get to that next here on 101 ESPN.
From the opening drive, the balloon party, BK and Ferrario, to the fast lane and more. If you missed anything on 101 ESPN today, get caught up with all the shows and 101 podcasts at 101ESPN.com or on your 101 mobile app.
Driven by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers.
Texting privacy policy and terms and conditions posted at renofi.com/notices. Texting enrolls for recurring automated text marketing messages. Message and data rates may apply. Reply stop, opt out.
John, I'm putting my foot down. We can't put off renovating this house any longer. Our kitchen.
They are St. Louis. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
With Tanner Hendrickson and Bradford Bruns. I'm Alex Ferrario. One's got to go coming up in our next segment. You send us 3 scenarios. We will tell you which one has to go. Air Comfort Service text line 314-399-9646. College football officially starts up this weekend. In fact, tomorrow we have Nevada versus SMU right here on 101 ESPN with pregame starting at 6:30. So as the season gets underway, we're not solely doing Mizzou here. We'll get more into the Mizzou season predictions next week once they start their year on Thursday. But I do think it's good to kind of go through what the predictions are looking like just in college football in general. Over in The Athletic, they went through their season predictions, went through what the playoff predictions are going to look like, the Power 5 schools and kind of who's going to be coming out conference champions. So let's go through this a little bit, boys. Let's look at the 4 power conferences and kind of see what our season prediction looks like there. Let's start in the SEC in terms of the SEC. I think this one's probably the easiest out of all of them, right? The dominant team in the SEC is Georgia for everybody.
Yeah. I think Georgia's the one that's going to win the SEC. This is, to me, the deepest conference in college football this season. You know, last year I thought it was the Pac-12, and a lot of people were like, it's SEC, it's the SEC. No, it was the Pac-12 last year. Now that that's broken up, and they have the star power with the quarterbacks, you look at the SEC conference, I mean, they dominated the top 25. Just taking a look at them in quick glance, you've got 9 teams that are in the top 25 that are in the SEC. Alabama, though they lost Nick Saban, they kept a lot of talent, including their quarterback in Jalen Milroe. You look at LSU, they're a team that's kind of on the outside looking in. Tennessee's another one of those. A&M, you've got Texas that's now in that conference. Ole Miss is loaded up just like Missouri. It's the deepest conference. I do agree Georgia's probably the team that ends up winning this conference.
But playoff prediction, I saw there were 5 SEC teams in the playoffs.
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me if they had that many make the playoff because this is a loaded conference. Now, one thing that could hurt them is that they all beat up on each other.
Yep.
That could be one kind of implication to having this deep of a conference. But, man, the battle to see who ends up getting to that conference championship game with Georgia is going to be fun to watch because I think it's Georgia, and then I think it's probably Alabama is probably in that second tier, maybe by themselves. But then you get to Ole Miss, Missouri, LSU, Tennessee, A&M. All those teams kind of fall in line with them. And I forgot about Texas again. They're probably up there with Alabama as well in the second tier.
Yeah, earlier in the program, we referenced ride or dies for the fantasy football landscape. My ride or die perpetually, year after year in college football, is the SEC until proven otherwise. And Tanner, you referenced, of course, Texas as well. You're number 1 in the SEC along with Oklahoma, of course. To me, a lot of individuals out there are putting Texas, at least prior to the beginning of the season, almost in the same class as a Georgia. And I have to be completely candid. I don't see it whatsoever. As recently as a few days ago, I understand, yes, Quinn Ewers, he was great at the QB position last year. I think BK may even have some conflicting viewpoints as far as his really projections for this season. But as recently as a few days ago, that backfield, it was down to 3 scholarship running backs. The offense during fall camp ravaged by injuries. You lost a lot. You still did lose a lot to the NFL. Brooks out of the backfield too. I'm not ready to put the Longhorns up there with Georgia because it's the easy, arguably borderline boring thing to do. But until you tell me that there is another team that can compete with Georgia in the trenches and who has a more efficient, steady quarterback than a Carson Beck. This is somebody who put it up last year, guys, more than 400 times through the air, and he barely had 5 picks. He's going to execute and make all of the requisite throws when they matter the most. To me, after that, there's a drop-off. You have Alabama. DeBoer, of course, coming from Washington. He brought with him an all-world center who's going to captain that offensive line. I love Milroe at that position, too. And a sneaky pick beyond a Missouri and Tennessee, which I believe is going to be pretty good as well. I'm really, really in love with Texas A&M. Mike Elko is known, having been, of course, at Duke. He's known as a defensive specialist. He has a tremendous quarterback in his own right. He has a trio of awesome receivers returning. And in the second half of the season, that defense is going to gain more and more credibility and be a real threat. Really a stacked conference, a couple of top-tier squads.
I think it's pretty easy to say that's going to be the most entertaining conference out of the Power 4 for the upcoming season. Who would you say the next conference is in terms of the entertainment factor? Because for me, I think it's the Big 12.
Ooh, they're mostly sleepy good.
Mostly because it seems like you only have 1 or 2 top-heavy teams, Utah, K-State. I think Kansas is going to be better than people are giving them credit for. I think you'll have a couple of other teams. UCF is always kind of hanging around there. I do think that's another one of those conferences that's going to beat up on each other.
Yeah, I have the Big 12 as the third best conference of the Power
Big 10 number 2?
I have the Big 10 at number
ACC
2.
was obviously the worst out of all of these.
Yeah, the ACC.
You have one team two teams that are entertaining, Florida State and Clemson, although I don't like Clemson.
And like, bold prediction for you, I think this is the last year of Dabo Swinney at Clemson.
Oh, I'm with you.
I think they miss the playoffs, and I think Clemson will take the big buyout and fire Dabo Swinney.
I think it could be the last year of Ryan Day, too, at Ohio State, unless you have a really successful season.
I'm with you there.
Successor is on staff.
He's on the hot seat as well. But I think when you look at the Big Ten, I don't know if it's because, like, with the Big 12 teams, it does have a chance to be interesting. I mean, you mentioned a couple of those teams. You've got Colorado in there as well.
Yeah, I forgot about Colorado.
I don't think they're going to be very good, but they've got names on that team that are at least going to make you want to watch them. The Big 12 to me is pretty deep in terms of there's just a bunch of solid, really good teams. I don't know if there's a great team in the Big 12.
True.
I think that's what separates the Big 10 from the Big 12 because I think there are two great teams in the Big 10, Ohio State and Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have Oregon winning it all this year.
Yeah.
I love what they've done this offseason. They get Dylan Gabriel to come in. They've got one of the best wide receivers in the country. They're going to be a really solid team, really great team. And then you look at the rest of the Big 10. Penn State's really good. Michigan's still really good. And then we'll see how USC ends up translating. I'm a little bit lower on them, but I think the Big 10's second best conference. I would go Big 12 is third, and then I would have the ACC as a clear fourth behind the Power Fours.
I'm with you there. SEC naturally is at the top of the mountain, then Big 10. There's a pretty steep drop-off before I get to the Big 12. You mentioned the Ducks. I am fascinated to see how that offense, how that scheme actually works against the more physical units in the Big Ten. But I like Oregon's chances. Honestly, I know that far and away still so many of the so-called pundits and the prognosticators, they're rolling with Ohio State. I need to see actually that Will Howard as the transfer quarterback there. Yeah. I need to see him actually elevate those offensive playmakers. And newsflash here, you don't have Marvin Harrison Jr. any longer. Now your running back room is better than anybody else's in the country. I'll give them that. Ryan Day, when it comes to clutch time, you would think that this year is finally going to be the one in which the Buckeyes are able to topple Michigan. Michigan obviously takes a step back. I love Oregon, though. And as for Penn State, however, wake me when Franklin wins a critical game later in December or January.
I was expecting an alliteration there from Bradford when he said that. Well, I was expecting wake me with something, and he didn't do it. So honestly, kind of disappointing.
And that's why I don't get the fantasy football invite.
All right, let's do a couple of these season predictions before we get to one's got to go. Who makes the Final Four in the college football playoffs?
So my Final Four, I mentioned Oregon. I think they win the Natty this year. I've got Oregon. I've got Georgia.
Those are my two.
I've got Alabama getting to the Final Four.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then the other team that I've got that I think will get there is Florida State. I think DJ Uiagalelei, he impressed me last year. I think he's going to be able to get his team to the Final Four. So that's mine.
Yeah, I have Georgia, I have Oregon, I have Florida State, I have Ole Miss getting there too.
Well, I like that one.
Kind of a sneaky one.
Yeah, they're a team that's going to be fun. They're a loaded offense. We'll see if they're able to get past that second round. That's the spot where I kind of worry about them, but I do like the Ole Miss prediction.
Georgia's the gimme for me. I will go with another SEC outfit as well in Alabama sneaking in. Oregon, naturally. That number 4 spot is so difficult to predict for me, and as much as it pains me almost to do this, I'm going to take a leap of faith here, given the schedule. We talked before the show about some of these teams in the top 10 hovering around that top 10 to top 15 radius, and exactly how the favorable schedules could help them move into the CFP picture. For me, that team could well actually be, believe it or not, Notre Dame this season. I think that Notre Dame could be in that mix, and given as long as you don't have a slip up there as well early in the season, and if Leonard pans out in the way that so many individuals think that he will there in Indiana, you could be working with something pretty nice.
Who misses out on the college football playoffs? Give me one team that surprisingly misses out on the playoffs.
I said it earlier, Clemson.
Yeah.
I think Clemson's a team that right now they're on the outside looking in as the 14 in the preseason rankings. Those mean nothing. Clemson's the team for me. I have no faith in that program under Dabo anymore.
Yeah.
And I think there's going to be serious talk, and there's already been calls for his job. I think there's going to be serious talk about Dabo Swinney losing the job at Clemson after this season.
Mine's K-State. And I think they're going to be one of those teams that should be in, but I think because the SEC is so strong that they're going to be one of those teams that's sitting at like 9-3 and just misses out on a playoff conversation.
Not a fan of Clemson, not a fan of Penn State's CFP hopes. A team that I will actually look at, examine, and tell you, and we didn't even mention this team in the preliminary rundown of the SEC. I really am ambitious and bullish on LSU's chances. Now, call that what you will, especially with the former Mizzou product taking over that defense. But I do believe last year, if you really think, guys, about the way in which the area in which this team was the most weak, Daniels leaves, of course, at the quarterback position, all of the talent, all the athleticism in the world, but the defense did nothing. If Brian Kelly is able to willingly surrender the reins on that side of the ball to Blake Baker, how does he make his bones? It's about an attack-oriented, wreaking havoc style of defense. They have the athletes there with Harold Perkins Jr. I think LSU could make some noise if you don't see some of the same self-destructive tendencies in October.
We've got One's Got to Go coming up next. You sent us 3 scenarios. We'll tell you which one has to go. Our Air Comfort Service text line, 314-399-9646. We'll get to One's Got to Go next on 101 ESPN.
Coverage of 101 ESPN is presented by Under Law Injury Lawyers. GetJim.com. Stay up to date on all things Redbirds with Cardinals broadcaster Brad Thompson as he joins the Fast Lane every Wednesday on 101 ESPN. Go up and in with BT during high heat, powered by Scott Lee Heating Company, your preferred Mitsubishi electric elite contractor. Visit ScottLeeHeating.com. And by Rawlings. Visit the all-new Rawlings experience at Westport Plaza today. 101 ESPN Sports Center.
Redbirds fly to Target Field. Good afternoon. I'm Bradford Bruns with your Sports Center update, driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Tonight, 7 o'clock hour, St. Louis kicks off a 3-game set, Twin Cities style. Andre Palante gets the assignment against second place Minnesota, which counters with 24-year-old David Festa. Yesterday's 3-0 shutout of Milwaukee leaves that Cards record at 63-64. Elsewhere, red-hot Arizona visits Boston. San Diego battles New York. Major NL wildcard implications there. College pigskin, Florida State meets Georgia Tech tomorrow, Dublin edition. Next week, number 11 Missouri will host Murray State. Senior quarterback Brady Cook is eager for real reps.
It's always a fun transition, moving from fall camp, obviously, and you get that off day, and then now we're kind of into that game preparation. Everybody's kind of working out their game week schedules, and we start to get some show team looks. So it's exciting, and we need to take it day by day.
The Sports Center update has been driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Giving you the picture, the real big St. Louis sports picture. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN. This is BK and Ferrario. Time now for One's Gotta Go. We offer up the talking points, and you get to pick which one's gotta go on 101 ESPN.
314-399-9646 is our Air Comfort Service text line. Our YouTube chat at 101 ESPN STL. The Graveyard chat as we get to One's Gotta Go. You send us 3 scenarios. We will tell you which one it has to go with Bradford, T-Bone, and I'm Alex. Let's start with this one from the 314. One has to go. Blues make the playoffs. Mizzou makes the playoffs, or Ollie gets fired. I'm going to set us up for a failure on that one. 2 positives and a negative.
Yeah, I'll get rid of the negative one. And I know people don't want to hear that, but, I don't necessarily think Ollie Marmol is a terrible manager. I don't think he's a great manager. I think he falls in line with the middling group, basically 5 to 25 across Major League Baseball. So I'll say Ollie doesn't get fired. You end up getting both of those other ones to come true.
Okay, you go.
Unless this team completely falls on its face in the last month plus of the season, I don't envision Marmol being dismissed following the campaign. I really, really don't. I think that it's certainly borderline as far as looking at next season, where the Blues stand in relation to other teams, obviously, in the Central. Who else is going to be on the come-up, so to speak, in the Western Conference? That one is a little more dicey to me right now, honestly, than the status of one Ollie Marmol. And for me, it's that CFP or bust mentality in Columbia. If Mizzou does not make it this season with the schedule, with the expectations, with the Heisman hopefuls, it's a huge disappointment. That to me is the number one certainty, frankly.
I'll get rid of the Ollie one too, as I'm kind of in the same line of thinking as T-Bone with that one. One's got to go music edition. Michael Jackson music, Taylor Swift music, or Eminem music? I mean, this one's easy for me.
For me, it'd be Taylor Swift, just because I like some of her stuff, but I'm not the biggest Taylor Swift fan, so she would be the one that would have to go for me.
I listen to the other two's music like on a regular basis. I think I know like 4 Taylor Swift songs.
Yeah, I know probably a little bit more than that, but I would agree. I probably listen to some of the Michael Jackson stuff a lot more, and Eminem.
A lot of the Taylor Swift music I listen to is the country version of Taylor Swift. I don't know if I listen to a lot of the, I don't know if I listen to a lot of the pop version of Taylor Swift.
I love the lyrics. I can appreciate, quite frankly, the iconic status through now a decade plus of Taylor Swift. I'm going to keep her. I'm going to keep MJ, and based on the recent output, that's why I have to dismiss Marshall Mathers.
That could have been the most obvious choice. Like, if you would have told me to bet my entire life savings on one music Bradford's going to get rid of, I had to have bet it was Eminem.
You don't even know back in the day, Pacific style. You don't even know about the streets in Franklin County, Alex. You don't know.
Hey, you seem like 8 Mile is down the road that away, Bradford. One's got to go. Pork, beef, chicken, or turkey? Pork, beef, turkey. I hate turkey.
Really?
Like, I'll eat a turkey sandwich like that. Yeah. That's like just the lunch meat I'll have. But like, other than that, I refuse to eat turkey.
So pulled pork, it's out?
No, I'm keeping my pulled pork. I'm keeping my beef.
That's tough.
I'm the only thing I seem to cook at my house for dinner is chicken. Like, it's just finding different recipes with chicken because it's the only thing I can get my toddlers to eat.
Yeah, I would get rid of, I like turkey. I would probably get rid of it though, because like, there's other lunch meats you could go to if you don't have turkey. And you could cook something. Really, the only time that I will make turkey sandwiches, but there's different lunch meats. The only other time where it's like, okay, where do I really want turkey would be Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Right.
But that's like 2 big meals. If we did something else, I could get away like a ham or something like that.
Yeah, ham's like in the same conversation as turkey, too.
I like turkey. It's not going out because I don't like it, but it's the one of the 4 that I just, I could live without it.
One's got to go. This one's right up the alley of T-Bone. One's got to go. Hammock, rocking chair, or a recliner.
Oh, hammock. I was like, what are you talking about?
How do you say it?
Hammock.
I say hammock.
Yeah,
I was stuck on that as well. What were options 2 and 3?
Hammock. Really? Is that the weird way to say it?
Hammock.
Yeah, I think hammock's the right way to say it.
Hammock. Oh, okay, that's good.
Spelling bee impromptu.
Rocking chair or recliner? I mean, rocking chair, I think we're going off of like the wooden rocking chairs, and then the recliner. I don't like a hammock. Apparently, because I can't pronounce it. But especially in St. Louis,
there's not many days for it.
Yeah, when are you laying in it because it's blistering hot or it's freezing cold?
The last couple days would have been perfect. Today would suck.
But then it's uncomfortable. And then have you ever tried to get out of one of these?
Oh, it's difficult.
You always fall flat on your face.
And that's why it's almost mystical, though, because you don't get it very much and you love the idea of it. Maybe the execution isn't as practical, but let's get rid of the rocking chair. Where are we, at Cracker Barrel here?
I love me a rocking chair at Cracker Barrel.
I would get rid of
me one.
I would get rid of the hammock as well, because of what you're saying. There's not as many days to do it because it's so hot. The summers here are terrible. The other thing too is depending on where you put those things, we used to have one at my house when I was growing up. My dad was like, this will be awesome. We'll get a hammock. It'll be great. We'll go sit in. A, we never sat in it because it was hot. 2, because it was one of those that was outside all the time. Yep. All the birds doing their business on it. It's disgusting when you're there.
Fair. We have one of those too. And all it is my 3-year-old and my 2-year-old climbing on it and then flipping over on each other and hurting themselves. Yeah. So we've put it in the shed and it does not come out. Let's do a couple more of these from the 618. Lawnmower, dishwasher, or microwave? This is easy.
Dishwasher.
It's the microwave.
Really? If you don't get leftovers, then
fine. But you could do leftovers. Air fryer. You could do it in the oven itself.
Oh, well, I guess that's true.
I don't know if I could survive without a dishwasher.
Oh,
I don't. Especially in this life with dishes stacking and kids. Bradford, you know this life.
I know it, but there's a reason here. There's a reason why I would not dismiss that dishwasher, because how many teachable moments, Mr. Ferrario, would you be able to have with the young ones in terms of taking care of those dishes the good old-fashioned way? There's nothing wrong with doing that. You can make do without.
I got to be honest with you. To the extent of teaching those kids is put the dishes in the sink and then move on, because I've seen them try and wash their dishes and more water is on the floor than it is in the sink cleaning off the plate.
True. You can also have the quality talks, though, conversations.
I can do that as we put them in the dishwasher. Could do that in the dishwasher.
I would. It's funny because I don't have kids, so that's why my answer's different. I would say get rid of the dishwasher.
Well, yeah, because you have 2 dishes to wash.
Yeah, it's easy for me to wash the dishes. It doesn't take time. And the thing I love about the microwave is
differences in life.
When I go out and I do play-by-play at night, I get home super late, so it's easy to just throw in leftovers into the microwave rather than having to turn the oven on, preheat it. I would get rid of the dishwasher.
I'm getting a lot of pushback on the way I pronounced hammock.
Yeah,
maybe you guys are pronouncing it wrong. Hammock is spelled Hammick. And ladies and gentlemen, that is a hard O in hammock.
I don't think so.
Hammock. I'm going to have to Google pronounce this one. All right, one more from the 314 Halloween edition. Old school caramel apples, candy corn, or Whoppers?
Oh, well, this one's easy. Candy corn's disgusting.
Oh, I love candy corn. I only eat it during Halloween, though.
A caramel apple,
Whoppers are disgusting.
If caramel apple with peanuts on it.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Whoppers are disgusting. Whoppers are literally a chocolate jawbreaker.
Oh, I love
You put them in your
Whoppers.
mouth and you just suck on them.
Oh, I
How
like
is that fun?
Whoppers. You don't suck. You chew them.
Yeah, they're hard as a freaking rock.
I like Whoppers. I get the candy corn. That's just disgusting.
There's a fine line here. I guess we differ on all 3 of these choices because, quite frankly, the candy corn, there's a time and a place, and I will indulge in that, yes, around Halloween season only, but I'll go back into that bin. Whereas with the apples, if I have one almost every other year, I'm more than fine. I can't imagine myself, feasting on those. Absolutely not. And Whopper's a good Whopper here and there, Alex. Maybe they need to be slightly melted if they're left out in the St. Louis heat for just a little bit and then bring them back. Nah.
It's trash food. Candy corn is so much better. With Tanner Hendrickson and Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. When we come back, we'll rewind it as we close down the week here on BK and Ferrario.
Join 101 ESPN for the second annual Blues and Brews on Friday, September 20th at the Anheuser-Busch Brewery. Get fired up for the blues season at this outdoor street party featuring live music from country music star Matt Stell and St. Louis's own Charles Glenn Group, plus appearances by blues players and alumni, food trucks, 101 giveaways, and more. Tickets are on sale now for Blues and Brews presented by Bud Light, 101 ESPN, and 92.3 WIL. Get all the details for Blues and Brews at 101ESPN.com. We're right back to more of it. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN. Let's run it back with a daily rewind on BK and Ferrario. Brought to you by Gloria Loom, your home sold guaranteed realty. Selling your home begins at GloriaHasTheBuyers.com.
fun show when Bradford Bruns is in studio. Appreciate him helping us out today as BK was out. He'll be back with us on Monday. And then, of course, he's taking 2 more days off next week like he just continues to do. But the three of us had a great time today. Plenty of Cardinals and Blues conversations to get into. A Fantasy Football Friday conversation, college football talk. You can check it all out up on our podcast page, 101ESPN.com, or wherever you get your podcasts from. It's always presented by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers. But let's rewind it here as we close down the week talking about the Cardinals series win against the Brewers and what's upcoming this weekend, T-Bone, against the Minnesota Twins. And I know it kind of sounded Debbie Downer-esque when we started the show, but it's just where I'm at with this Cardinals team. It was a great series win. I'm glad that they instilled more optimism for people and hope, but I viewed that series more about where the Milwaukee Brewers are at in terms of the toughness in the National League playoff conversation this year than I did the Cardinals. If they go out there and continue this run, and this was a jumping off point against Minnesota, San Diego, Yankees, and the Brewers again, then great. I will admit I'm wrong and take the foot out of my mouth. But for right now, that just felt like I watched a Milwaukee Brewers team that might be hitting the end of their hot streak than I did the Cardinals starting a hot streak.
Yeah, I was kind of with you. I thought that series was more telling of the Brewers because, the Cardinals didn't really beat them with, great offensive production. Sure, they put up 10 runs in that game, too. They were also gifted, I think it was 13 walks in the final 2 games of that series. Wasn't pretty baseball played by the Milwaukee Brewers. Honestly, wasn't pretty baseball played by the Cardinals in game 2 of that series. I thought it was pretty telling of the Brewers that they came into St. Louis, dropped 2 of 3, and didn't really look like what their record shows on paper. And that, to your point on the Cardinals, I just saw this tweet. For them to get to 87 wins, they've got to win 24 of their next 35 games.
I'm thinking the same thing.
And if it's going to be less, like say 85, it's 22 in the next 35. The Cardinals played well in that stretch from basically Mother's Day up until that Royals doubleheader right before the All-Star break. They're not showing signs of that right now. Maybe they can, and if they turn it around, that'd be great because trust me, there'd be a lot more to talk about with this team. But I think it was more telling of the Brewers than it was of the Cardinals in this series that we just saw.
Yep. Well, we'll find out. Andre Palante on the mound tonight. You've got Sonny Gray on the mound tomorrow, and then you wrap it up with Eric Fetty against the Minnesota Twins on Sunday. So you got the pitchers that you want on the mound going up against this Minnesota Twins offense that has been red hot as of late. T-Bone and I will be back on Monday with BK. Have a great weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on Monday. The Fast Lane coming up next from 2 to 6 here on 101 ESPN.
Sign up to play fantasy football with Adam Wainwright, Kyle Gibson, Lars Nootbaar, and others during Big League Impact's 2024 fantasy football season. Help support some awesome charitable causes handpicked by the participating players and show off your fantasy skills with a chance to win a variety of prizes. Space is limited. You can find all the details on how to sign up for Big League Impact's 2024 fantasy football season now at 101ESPN.com.
Since 1961, one name has stood as a beacon of fine dining in St. Louis: Charcoal.